One clock says 10:02 and one says 9:59, so we'll go ahead and get started.
There you go.
It's just the way my life goes these days. Welcome back, everybody. I don't know why, it seemed like I haven't seen y'all in a month of Sundays. So I'm happy to see all the folks here in the room. I believe we got a pretty good contingent online. Tom?
Not yet.
Not yet?
We will. We have Larry right now, Haley as an alternate. And those are the two we have, but I know we have more coming.
Very good. Well, as they come on, if you'll let us know, and let us know if we get to a quorum. Not there
We
yet.
got 13 total, so I think we only have 25 on the council, so we are at one.
Okay, very good.
I believe.
Well, we definitely.
Well, again, good morning, everybody. Just go over the agenda real quick. Today we'll be developing the progress matrix. View and discuss comments and edits on the draft plan. Hopefully, everybody's had the opportunity to go through what we've had submitted to us. I know there's a couple of chapters out there we're still working on. Additionally, we'll review the draft executive summary. Quite an executive summary it is. It's not one paragraph, so hopefully you had an opportunity to look at that as well. And we'll begin to plan for the next public meeting when we release this and share it with the community and take comments or answer questions and prepare for the comment period. I would accept a motion that we approve this agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
Move second. All in favor? Anybody opposed? We good online? The agenda is approved. I believe everybody's gotten the January 15th minutes and summary. I would accept a motion that we approve those.
Motion to approve. Second.
Second, any discussion on those? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing no opposition, passes. So as y'all know, there's been movement on the water SC group. And additionally, there was a meeting of the legislative surface water study committee. And with the water SC, I don't know if everybody is aware of this, so I'll go ahead and let y'all know this. I've been attending those meetings just as a member of the public. However, Jill Miller with South Carolina Rural Water Association asked if I would be her alternate on that group. I've accepted that. So I will be acting as her alternate when she's not available. So I'll continue to go to those meetings. There's actually a meeting tomorrow that I'll be attending. She has a prior commitment. Since we last met, Water SC got together. Quite frankly, at the end of that meeting, they didn't have a comfort level that they could submit a plan to the legislative group by the end of January as originally envisioned and required. However, the Surface Water Study Committee met, and in lieu of what Water SC was doing, they had recommended to make a joint resolution to both the House and Senate that their charter be changed to allow Water SC to complete their work before they really tackle their work. Now that joint resolution, to my knowledge, was made. It was introduced and had the first reading on January 28th, at least for the House. That went to committee. Committee came out favorably. And that committee was Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Environmental Affairs. 212. Again, that came out of committee on the House side. I don't know where it is on the Senate side. And I meant to look before we came in here and just didn't have the opportunity to see if it's gone anywhere. I fully expect it to come out of that. And again, that is really twofold. It changes the deadline of their work instead of March of 24 to be March of 20. I'm sorry, instead of March of 25 to be, I think they said 90 days after the end of 25. So March of 26. Additionally, they agreed that they would look at groundwater as well as surface water. I don't know if they're going to keep the name the Surface Water Study Committee or not. But that is how it's known right now, and that's how I'll refer to it till something else comes out of it. So right now we'll have to wait to see what the Senate does. I fully expect it to pass both houses, and which certainly makes sense to let the state water plan to be developed before they start taking action on what they should be doing legislatively.
If I understand correctly, they did not submit anything by January 31st.
That is my understanding as well.
It's kind of asking permission after the deadlines. But
Well, that's
also requesting permission to do what they think is a better way.
correct. So the I don't have my timeline in front of me. Myra, after the last Water SC meeting, wrote a letter to the governor expressing some concerns with the deadline in that process. The governor agreed at that time or during that same time. The legislature started their thing in motion. So it seems extremely reasonable they're going this way. So the governor did ask Water SC to make quarterly reports to the legislative group. But I believe is in place now. That is on moving the process forward. That is just my vantage. Anybody else know anything differently? Have anything else to bring to the table? I don't know if Joe is on.
Joe's not currently on right now.
Okay. So tomorrow, like I said, there is a Water SC meeting. I'll be going to that, and they'll be continuing their work, and we'll try to learn a little bit more about where we're headed with that. All right. Hearing no more discussion on that, or me actually being quiet about it. Meeting's going to be a little bit different today. John knew he wasn't going to be able to join us, and Kurt was asked to head up this meeting. Unfortunately, due to weather and physical well-being, Kurt cannot be with us in person today, but he is online. He will be hosting this meeting, leading this meeting from the virtual. So because of that, I ask that we try not to have too many side conversations so we can address him, so he can hear what's being said, as well as everybody else online. But I know we're a very active group and very engaged group, but I would ask, particularly for this meeting, that we try to refrain from that so it all goes well. As you know, that what they capture in a lot of the write-ups are things that we have conversations about, sentiments that we share. So in order for them to be able to capture what we are thinking, and certainly the minutes and agenda that or summaries that Tom does as well. I ask that we try to minimize that. With that, Kurt, you feel like taking over?
I'll give it my best, KC. I appreciate that.
Thank y'all.
Let me just check the technology first. Can you hear me okay on that end?
Yes.
Okay, and you can see my screen? I think we covered that. Okay, apologies if you can see me too. That's not what people want, but I apologize for not being able to be there in person. I always enjoy this group and being there for these discussions. I'll do my best from where I am. I know we don't usually begin with a safety minute, but I'll offer this as one and as an excuse. If you are the one who's fixing your deck boards so that nobody falls through, don't be the one to fall through. That's an important lesson in life that I learned just in the last few days. I'm all right, but couldn't travel. One thing I'll ask is that if you are speaking, kind of to follow up on Casey's remark, I cannot see your faces here. I don't know who's talking. If you don't mind just stating your name before comments, and you don't need to do any more than that. Just, hi, this is Steve, this is Joanne, this is whoever, and please just state your name so that I can recognize more clearly who's speaking. Is that a fair request?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on. Are there any, before we get to our topics for the day, any other public and agency comments that we might have either in person or online?
We don't have any public here.
Nothing online?
Nope.
Okay, all right, hearing none, let's move on. Casey did a good job of introducing our tasks for today. A lot to cover, a lot of different topics to bounce around between, and I'm hoping we can seize on the momentum that we had in our last meeting, where we really finalized a lot of the language in the recommendations. We'll be talking about language a little bit today, in some other things. I think the criticality of this language may be a little less critical in its precision than they are in the recommendations. The recommendations, by their own definition, need to be very, very clearly articulated. These are the things that you're voting on, really, in your approval of the plan. We'll talk about that later today, too. What we're going to be talking today about are first, performance metrics, ways that you can measure success. These are collection of good ideas. These can change and morph as you move forward, but really it's a way to help keep the group accountable for the recommendations that you're making, and a way to measure the success of this planning process and make adjustments as we move on. So let's get into that first. We'll spend, I think, the next about hour on this. We'll get as far as we can. I'd like to try to keep us on schedule because there are other things to talk about. If this warrants some further discussion, we can continue this in the next meeting. One thing I will say, just as an overarching thought to tuck away in the back of your head, the time will come very soon to vote on this draft plan. You've all had a chance to review many of the draft chapters, the comment log. We'll talk about that today as well. But we'll kind of gauge people's positions, not positions, but opinions at the end of the meeting today to see when you feel you might be ready to have that vote and what the criteria are for voting on the draft plan. So keep in mind that the further we can get today in agreeing on these metrics and agreeing on the revisions in the report based on your feedback, the closer we'll be to doing that. And John and I were talking and agreed that it could happen as early as next month, maybe more likely in April, that we take the first vote on the draft plan approval. But we'll kind of review the process for voting, and the thing to tuck in the back of your minds today is, are there any items, any issues that you see or that you've talked about that give you pause, either minor pause or significant pause in your ability to approve this plan and live with it, be able to live with it? That's the definition of our consensus. So keep that in mind as we're talking, and we'd like to address those things that you feel you might not be able to live with as we go along today. That's what I commend this group for taking the time you did to do that with the recommendations. You made sure that as a group, they reflected your collective values and you can live with them. and endorse them in many cases. The language we'll talk about today is probably a little less critical than those recommendations, not to diminish its importance. But if it sparks any thoughts in your minds about whether you can or can't live with these changes, these metrics, these recommendations, whatever we're talking about, let's flag that and talk about it, because the more of those we can resolve, the easier it will be to get this plan approved and published. So the first thing we're going to do now is the metrics. The metrics are part of the planning framework, and they're basically a way to help keep everybody accountable and to improve the process as we move forward. So you have made a series of recommendations. These will appear in the plan. The metrics are ways to assess the performance and the quality of actions taken by the RBC. It's a framework that proposes that you as a group determine how you can measure the success or failure of an action taken by an RBC. So that this goes beyond the objectives, the priorities, the recommendations, but to any action that might result from this plan, you're thinking about how to measure the success or failure of that. And so what we'll do, try to keep this simple but useful. Earlier on, much earlier on in the process, you identified 6 objectives for this plan. Improving water use efficiency, communicating, coordinating, and promoting findings, recommendations, improving the technical understanding of water resource management, protecting water resources, improving drought management, and promoting engagement in the planning process. Those are the objectives that you identified as a group that you wanted this plan to revolve around. Now, recently, these have been prioritized. And Casey, I don't know if you want the floor just for a minute to explain a little bit about the prioritization process and sort of the thinking that you've been doing in prioritizing not just these objectives, but things behind the scenes. Is that, would you like to do that? Would that be helpful?
So that's been more than a month ago that I did that. I absolutely do not recall exactly the process I did. However, so generally I looked at them and based on our 18 months or however long it's been, conversations about what we have thought this group, our chores, our tasks were here, the conversations we had. I tried to reflect that in our prioritization, and also in, to some degree, likelihood of success. There are some things that we certainly beholden on us, and we can certainly get things done. There are others that are much loftier or require other folks to really help take up the mantle. And if my memory, take that for what it's worth, serves me correct, that's really how I look to do it. And also there are some things that kind of we already have in place, or there's already mechanisms to do it. So I didn't think that necessarily required as much action and energy from this group to get it done. Hopefully that's correct.
Thank you, Casey. Does anybody have any questions on these? Again, the prioritization is really just a way to communicate to others the topics that you feel, as Casey said, you might have the most influence over or the most pressing, and have some chance of success. Any questions on these priorities? They're not really going to define what we do next. It's really, again, just a way to emphasize those things that you feel the RBC can really have some influence over. Okay.
Close to what the group thinks may be right on that. Again, these aren't set in stone.
In my opinion, yes.
Why, thank you, sir.
All right, we can revisit these if we need to. We'll be talking about each one, but the reason I wanted to show these now is that we'll take time with each of these 6 objectives and it's the objectives that we'll be developing performance metrics for. How do we measure or not whether we're succeeding in these things? Now we're not starting from scratch. And I think Grace Houghton is with us today. Thank you, Grace, for joining us, serving as a backup for me. But also, you had spent some time, I believe, compiling some ideas from some of the other RBCs, and we'll start with those, and we'll just see where we go. I think the question on these is not so much, let's get the wording perfect. Is the list for each objective complete? Are there things that you'd like to add in terms of measurement? Are you able to measure these things? Are these things that are going to be ascertainable? Are they clear? And are they effective both for measuring the success of this plan and maybe the success of the planning process itself? So it's probably a little more qualitative exercise than one in precision. But let's get into it, and you'll see what I mean. Okay. Objective number 1 was to improve the water use efficiency to conserve water resources. That number in parentheses at the end there was just the priority of the objective for reference. And what some of the other RBCs had developed here, and what we proposed just as a starting point for discussion, are these two metrics that water utilities establish a baseline water loss leak detection measure, and improvement is seen over 5 years in subsequent surveys. So not a quantitative target, but a measure of improvement, obvious measurable improvement in water loss and leak detection. And the second one was funding opportunities identified and used to implement conservation strategies. So I'll ask the group, are these appropriate for the Saluda? Is this list complete for the progress metrics for this objective? Are they clear? And do you think they'll be effective?
Kirk, it's Catherine. 1A has a clear owner, 1B does not.
Okay, how would you propose dealing with that? And I will say that some of these metrics in some of the other river basin councils have been things that are beyond your control. They are measurable, but not necessarily within your direct control. I think 1A here, you're right. You'd be able to gather that information, advocate for it. 1B, you're not going to make money appear out of nowhere, but it can be measured. So are you suggesting, Catherine, that you'd like to see some responsibility assigned with these as well?
I mean, yeah, I guess we just need to, like, who's identifying the funding opportunities? I mean, it's broad, which is fine. Like, we could identify just one and apply for it, right? Is it us, or are we like looking to municipalities to do this? Are we looking to nonprofits to do this? Is it
well, remember, this is not a recommended action in and of itself. Those are separate things that you and John went over in one of the last 2 meetings, I think. These are just questions that you as an RBC can ask yourselves periodically. Are these things happening? For 1A, are the water utilities establishing a baseline detection measure? Have we seen improvement over the last 5 years? It really doesn't matter who's doing it. These are just questions that you or others could use to gauge the success of the things that you're recommending. So it's not saying go do this. It's saying if you were to ask these questions a year from now or 5 years from now, would you be able to get some data on that, and would you be able to answer these questions? So maybe it's better to think of these as questions rather than as actions.
So Kirk, this is Robert Henley. I was just about to say that perhaps is it better, like you said, to ask these as questions that then that's a simple yes, no sort of way to approach progress.
Right. Or you can ask how much, how much leak detection has been accomplished, how much funding has been identified, things like that. You can put a scale to it. But I think it's more useful to think of these conceptually as questions that you would ask and get answers to gauge the effectiveness of the plan. Does that make sense, Catherine?
Sure.
So, my question is when these priority numbers that we have here, how those priority numbers really gonna play out? I mean, if we we got a 4 up there for, the water efficiency, I think that deserves a higher number. It should be a higher priority. That's last in as far as a 1 to 5 priority list here. And you got water efficiency and conservation measures as a 4. I mean, that's what we're here for.
And that's a very valid point. I would say that I think, and I'll echo what Casey said, that these priorities can be changed. Some of the RBCs elected not to prioritize the objectives, just kind of, they're all important. We need to do all of them. But I think what Casey was suggesting is that these priorities, in some cases, reflect the fact that a lot of these activities are already going on. And maybe as an RBC, you should prioritize those things that are new and that you have some direct control over as you think about how to use your limited time and energy. So I think that context is important. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, sir, it does. So I just think we just need to keep our ears on here and on the ball here and understand what we have in front of us is a number that prioritizes, has priority to it, but that prioritization can change. And certainly again, digging in more than it's over the next 4 to 5 years.
It sure can. It can. And I think that's one of the reasons that these metrics will be useful. If you have, 2 top priority objectives and your metrics are coming back all positive, they're great, making a lot of progress, and you see some of the lower ones, maybe like this 4 or 5 or 6, the metrics are coming back and they're not as encouraging. Maybe you reemphasize that. Maybe you say, all right, let's focus now more our energy on the ones that we're not seeing as much progress on. So those can be reprioritized at any time. And I think that's important to realize. And one of the ways that you can use the answers to these questions to actually gauge where you're making progress and where you might be able to make more progress in the future.
Thank you, Kurt. Great answer.
Kurt, it's Catherine. I think another thing that we might be just like missing the connecting of the dots is how these tie directly back to the 5-year implementation plan.
Mm-hmm.
Do you or Grace just have the ability to quickly share that?
Yeah, let me ask Grace if you have that. I have all kinds of things queued up here, Grace, but that's not one of the ones I have.
You mean actually share, like pull up the implementation plan?
Yeah, because Catherine, what you're talking about are all the actions, right, that you're recommending and sort of a distinction between actions that are essential, necessary, and those that would be nice to have. And the linkage here is that these metrics are ways to gauge how effective those are. So
right.
Let me stop sharing here. Grace, are you able to share?
Yeah, I think I'm able to now. Can everyone see my screen?
Perfect, Grace. Thank you.
Okay.
So we've
go
got
ahead.
7, 5, and then I think 4 under ABC of actual like actions and the strategy. So we further prioritize the strategy by all these sub actions also. And what Casey and I talked about is because it's like a 5-year action plan, it's all important, right? Anything that's happening in a 5-year period is inherently important. Like none of these are 20 or 30 down the road, right? So they're all priority in the sense that we care about all of them, but then we just wanted to highlight the ones that were most important. So that's what's in column C. This first one is kind of an exception because we're relying really on external folks. And so then rather than do what other basins had done, I don't know, this isn't the most up-to-date one, but rather than do high, medium, low, because saying something that's important is low, we felt like contradicted it. So we wanted to just highlight the ones that were actually high. So Casey went through and did that. Yeah, it was like a yes, like this one's priority because they're all important. So that was the strategy Casey initiated and I assisted a little with. So then that first one, objective 1, Kirk, you're saying those 2 statements are the 2 ways to measure the success of these, what is this, 11, 16 actions.
That's right. That's a great way to describe it, Catherine.
Cool.
Yep.
'Cause I forgot about that too. I needed to like awaken my brain to that fact this morning. So does that make sense?
Exactly. And that's the difference between the action and just a way to measure its success.
Yes.
Yeah, so we were really trying to pull out the key themes from all of the actions listed for these different objectives. And in some of the earlier basins, we fell into trying to have metrics for every single strategy under each objective, and it ends up just kind of regurgitating what the strategies are. So more recently with some of the basins, RBCs have been trying to pull out really the key themes from the strategies under each objective instead to make it a bit more effective. So this is, again, our first take at it. I'm not offended if anyone wants to change anything, but that was the idea behind it.
Thanks, Grace.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. And just sum it up. Catherine, I'm glad you brought this up because the actions here are things that you can do or recommend that other people do. And the metrics are just the questions that you ask. Is that effective? Like, okay, I recommend that I fix the transmission on my car. And a month later, I'll ask, did it work? Am I able to change gears? Right. That's basically the difference between the two, an important distinction.
Yeah, so looking at this first one of conserving water resources, the two things we pulled out are the first one's really focused on the municipal conservation because all of these actions, the main idea behind it is reducing the water utility usage. So finding a baseline and seeing if there is a difference. And then for the remaining two, for agricultural and industrial and energy conservation, the most important part of that was pulled out was trying to look for funding opportunities. And again, that ties for municipal conservation too. We also need funding opportunities for that, but just another key necessity to make these actions possible.
All right, so let's go back here to the progress metrics.
Gonna take the screen again, Kirk, or do you want me to pull that up?
I think I did.
Okay.
People, you can see that, okay? Okay, so in that context now, that these metrics are ways of ascertaining how effective all those actions are. Is this a complete list? Is it clear? And do you think it will be effective? If you were to come back a year from now, or 5 years, and ask these questions, would you be able to get data? Would you be able to ascertain the state of things and make maybe further recommendations or reprioritize these objectives based on the responses?
Kurt, this is KC. So looking at the 1A and thinking about water utilities, that's really going to be somewhat utilities driven because there are certain utilities that we're all required to do a leak detection program by regulation. So all public water utilities do that. And this improvement is seen over 5 years. Quite frankly, there are utilities that have kind of gotten to the point of diminishing returns. You know, their numbers are good. They're certainly within industry standards. So they focus their attention on other more meaningful programs for the utility. So there may not be an opportunity for them to improve. Because it may not make sense for them to look for that last 2% water loss. So I think there at least needs to be a caveat if they're outside the industry standard or some verbiage along there. Because we don't want to set matrix that, you know, a system is industry-wise, you know, doing exceptional, but because this wasn't written to allow that, they're not showing an improvement, and therefore they fail our matrix.
would it be appropriate to use the word that we've used in some of the recommendations and say reasonable improvement within industry standards? Is that a good way to caveat that, Casey?
Tate,
Yeah, I think this sounds pretty good. I mean, I need to think it over, but you're right. There's a lot of people chasing something that's just not, you're wasting a lot of money for very little return.
yeah.
Could we note the percentage or, I don't know how to do quantity, because obviously you've got to weight them and all. But I was wondering, if certain water utilities, are in that situation, could we have a metric that noted,
Meeting industry standards.
which ones were meeting understands, or, towards the upper end of it, I was wondering if we could note the percentage of water utilities that were in that situation might be an interesting thing.
Honestly.
This is Tom Smith, rather than saying improvement, why don't you just say lead industry standards?
Yeah, see.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So kind of replace this whole thing with you determine how many utilities are meeting industry standards for water loss leak detection.
That would be, yeah.
I think that's what we're all shooting for, so you might as well measure us by what our goal is.
And I assume it's safe to say industry standards are not declining. Fair assumption.
Yeah, AWWA has some real strong guidance, and almost every utility's meeting what they call their exceeding the leakage infrastructure index. So the metrics are out there. But KC and Tate were right. There's a point of diminishing return. Because you can throw good money after bad real quick. Because even a brand new water supply project has unallowable leakage in brand new standards.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I just say, this is Rick, I just think our resource managers, water utilities per se, your comments and feedback are really great, help us level this comment.
Well, even, this is Jeff, even AWWA is getting, I can't say that word, AWWA is getting away from percentages now.
Yeah.
It's non-revenue water. I mean, it's monetary values now instead of percentages in your water loss.
So whatever these standards are, however they morph, you'll be able to measure that in the future here, the way this is worded. Okay. All right. What about this other one, 1B? Again, this is not an action that you're taking. It's a way to gauge how funds may become available in the Saluda Basin to support conservation strategies. The way it's written is kind of a yes/no.
This Tate, who's going to identify?
Well, again, this is a question that you could ask as an RBC. Has the state authorized funding? Have utilities received grants? Things like that.
It's kind of articulated in this matrix that'll precede this information in chapter 10.
Right. It's not a
Ooh, just not.
to go get funding. That's part of the actions that Catherine was talking about. This is a way to assess, was funding achieved? Was funding found?
I don't either. As long as we're actually gonna do something later.
Kurt, I think you have support on it.
Put it in there.
Okay. Let's move on. We can always come back and adjust these if needed, but let's move on to the next one. This is for the objective number 2, which has the top priority. Basically, this is communicate, coordinate, and promote findings and recommendations from the River Basin Plan. This is all about outreach and making sure that what you've recommended gets heard. And so there were 3 here, I think, that were identified. Yeah, three identified. And then, again, this is based on what some of the other RBCs have discussed and recommended, and things that we felt might be appropriate for you. Just read them off quickly. And again, think about, are these complete? Are they effective? Are they clear? The Saluda RBC continues to meet regularly, including regular coordination meetings with other RBCs. The state has approved funding for river basin planning activities, and the river basin plan that you'll be publishing soon is referenced during complementary planning processes such as resilience planning, watershed-based planning, economic development planning, and education planning. And one thing I wanted to throw out there too was the water SC process. So let's get some discussion and feedback on these.
And let me know if you want me to pull up the implementation table again at any point to
Mhm.
remind us of what the strategies are.
Yeah, thanks, Grace.
Catherine, I agree. We definitely need one, like a separate letter that's related to water SC. And our continued coordination and involvement, which luckily we inherently have with Casey, but it should be stated. No, I think it should be in
I think this should be a D.
D,
Oh,
separate,
yeah, okay, all right.
please.
Jill's our chair.
How would you like to word that, Catherine? Just make sure that I'll ask you, how would you like to word that?
Let me work on it while other people comment.
Okay, I'll just leave a place marker here.
So I don't know how to word this, Kirk, but Robert Handel here. One thing I do not see in this.
Mhm.
Think about public outreach. Yes, the RBC is meeting, but I don't see anything in here about public outreach. What we are doing to reach the public, and I would suggest that be added as a metric. Again, I don't know how to word it.
Yeah.
Yes, we have public outreach as a metric.
It seems to me, I'm just going to skip ahead here, that that is mentioned in one of the following objectives. Let me just check and we'll come back. There is one of our objectives, promote engagement in the planning process, active membership, coordination with outside groups, and outreach efforts focused on water planning. So there are some references later on, but I can certainly see relevance here in this one, especially given that it's the top priority.
And the first part is communicate.
Yeah. So let me ask this: is this coordination objective? It was originally or metric associated with the promote engagement in the water planning process, which is the second priority. Does that belong really in both?
It does. Yes,
Well, I think the first one, how I read it, is all about supporting the river basin plan as it's developed. The efforts to make sure that the plan is an active document in other works, not concept of doing planning on, but the plan itself. Whereas some of the other matrix are the overall philosophical water planning effort that is kind of addressed in the plan, but the first one was to make sure Water SC knows that the Saluda River Basin Plan is a document they go to the municipalities when there are the counties are utilizing it in their planning efforts, that it is a active document in water planning process. That's how I kind of in my mind differentiated those.
Okay. So Casey, you feel that the outreach is more relevant down here in the promoting engagement in the planning process, and you're kind of looking at this second one here, communicate, coordinate, promote findings, as an objective to make sure that the plan is actually in use in other activities.
That's kind of how I looked at this, but that's just me.
I agree with Casey on that. It needs to be a living, actionable document that can be continue to be worked upon and implemented as we go forward.
Can I add a little note to clarify that here?
Yeah.
I disagree only because of the strategy we have articulated under.
Okay.
Like we literally have engagement under objective 2.
Well, let me ask this, would it hurt to include a metric here that looks at outreach as a sort of a means to ensure these things are happening? You can do what you can to make sure that the plan is being used by municipalities and other planning efforts, other state efforts, the Water SC. But does outreach get in the way of that, or could it be something that you'd want to measure and say, well, maybe the reason why these others aren't happening is because we're not outreaching or reaching out enough? I guess the question to the group is, does it hurt to include, I'll just copy what we had from the other. Does it hurt to include that?
The alternative is moving strategy from objective 2I down to objective 6. Which might be helpful.
Say that again, Catherine. I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that.
So objective 2,
Mm-hmm.
strategy I, is the state should support and fund led and statewide water education programs that include all sectors of water use and promote the types of water management strategies recommended in the river basin plans. So that gets into education.
Mm-hmm.
Objective 6 is, I guess, primarily trying to do. So maybe it just needs to get moved.
How would people feel about that?
I'm just spitballing here. Look alive, people.
My understanding was that was originally included under objective 2 because the focus of that outreach was on promoting the strategies in the river basin plan, versus objective 6 was more about promoting engagement and awareness of the planning process itself. Just as some background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess my question is, do we need to make the distinction of where outreach is important? I mean, I think we could make the argument that it's important for any of these objectives. And maybe the more it's emphasized, the more likely it will be to occur. So I rather than kind of figure out where that action belongs more effectively, I would suggest that maybe in these project metrics, we use these to include or assess how well the outreach is going for any of these objectives, really.
So let me, in my mind, the way I'm seeing these differences is, imagine somebody from the RBC's been asked to speak to 2 different events. One is in front of a county council to talk about the river basin plan, and one is to talk about in front of a school about water basin planning. To me, the RBC priority would be go to county council, not the school. Not saying the school's not important, but if you had to make a choice from the RBC point of view, the political one would be where the emphasis would be. That's how I'm seeing these different. Again, this is me and my filters. But that's how I see the difference between, they're both educational, they're both extremely important, but I see a difference in my mind of the effort that needs to be prioritized.
So Casey, if I can interpret what you're saying, I see you saying here that the RBC should be engaging with other planning groups and not just making sure that the plan is referenced. Right, that one of the metrics here should be how engaged is the RBC in other groups that are using the plan or should be using the plan. Is that fair?
Yes, I'm trying to see if it's already in there.
I feel like it's
Well, he's making this top, so let me ask this, clarify this, in my mind. I understand the difference in what we're saying, we're talking about the process on one end, and then we're talking about the plan, and making that available. Let me ask this question, the plan, when we're finished with the plan and stuff, how accessible is it to the general public? Do we need to make a statement somewhere in here that we own it, available to the general public, for anybody to see? This one, the way I see it, is addressing the plan. Primarily, we're looking at regulatory folks, planning people, that sort of thing that are actually implementing on a large scale. Some of these water plans are with impacts on a larger scale. But I don't mind putting in here that the public will have access to.
Mhm. Does that belong more in number 6 here, the promoting engagement in the water planning process?
It's both. They're both. We want them to be engaged in the water planning process, but to do that, they need access to the plan to see what's on.
So here you're suggesting creating broad access to the plan so that these other things can happen. And the question would be, is the plan available and accessible and easy to find?
Well, and I think that's appropriate because we have in a couple of different areas, making sure that we have a clearinghouse of data to include the plan. That the state is funding those activities to make sure the plan is available and updated. So I'm a Thompson. I think it fundamentally has to be put in there that the plan is kind of that, for the cliche, but a living, breathing document that's used by people. Anytime people in the Saluda Basin start talking about water resources.
Mm-hmm.
It's an obvious assumption that it will be, but how many errors do you get to the internet? That's what he's saying. You're going looking for set point, and doesn't it make sense to have a metric to ensure that doesn't occur? We come back and ask, can you find it?
Yeah.
Yep.
So CDM Smith, we can take a crack at wordsmithing these based on the discussion. We don't need to get all these perfect today. But what I want to make sure is that we're covering the intent. And as you look at this list, even if there's duplication in others, are we covering the intent of this objective, communicating, coordinating, promoting the findings and recommendations from the River Basin Plan, and by extension, it says to those who need it or want it. Is this a good list?
Eric is Catherine. To Casey's earlier point, E needs to be rephrased to be less about just like education outreach more broadly, but more towards like education to councils or education to groups that would be using the plan itself, right? So I don't know if you want to get that and try to play with it later, but I do agree with Casey.
I'm not going to try to get the word. It's perfect here, Catherine, but.
And I got one for D for you.
Okay, good. What do you have?
The Saluda RBC is included in the water SC process. And the approved Saluda Basin plan is incorporated into the statewide plan.
Is that the gist of it, Catherine?
Yes.
So the important distinction here, the RBC is the group is included in the process and the plan is incorporated into the plan.
Yeah, you can make it two different ones.
Should we, or would you like to keep it as one?
Water sees dictating.
We're getting graded, I want to, at least we succeed on one and fail on the other.
Sorry, what? I missed that. What was that?
I said, if we're gonna get graded, I want it to be 2.
Okay. I don't think you're going to get graded, but you might. I think the point of this is how you grade yourself. Okay. I think I'm hearing that there's some agreement that this is okay. We'll work on wordsmithing again, and again, I don't think it's a problem that there's a little overlap as long as the targeted function of what we say here is appropriate for the objective and its intent. Is that?
Yeah, One more comment here, Kurt, from Thompson.
Yeah, this is Thompson again, and rather than saying the Saluda RBC is included, we don't have a lot of control over that, but we do have control of whether or not we participate in the process. I would say that you don't do it. Saluda RBC participates in the RBC process.
People okay with that? I think that's an important distinction.
Heads nodding.
Okay. All right, again, we will summarize these, we'll wordsmith a little bit and bring them back to you. But again, our goal here is to make sure that we're covering everything. Let's go to the next one here, in the interest of time. This is number 3. I think we've got 2 slides for this one, which we do. This is improved technical understanding of water resources management issues. We've got 6 ideas here that have been compiled. I'll just read them off and we can have the same discussion we just had. Again, this is improved technical understanding. That can be for you. It can be for decision makers outside of this body. It can be for the public. This is for you to define. Impacts of groundwater uses are assessed in future planning phases. Future modeling efforts consider future uncertainties. I highlighted that in green, not knowing if you wanted to maybe expand on that and define what some of those are. And county collected flow data. Water quality issues and concerns in the basin are identified and a strategy to study approaches to address them is developed. The USGS stream flow gauges in the basin are maintained and increased if DES recommends as such. All data necessary to support implementation actions in future areas of study is accessible and made available to the RBC and public. And the financial impacts of sedimentation on reservoirs and water resources are identified. Results are communicated to local governments. So these are all worded and structured as ways that you can measure success. The questions I would ask, are they appropriate? Is this list complete in terms of filling technical gaps and understanding? And are they effective?
Hi, it's Catherine. I would get rid of future uncertainties and just leave that as a single statement. If we want to have another comment related to other uncertainties, we can add them, but I don't know if that adds value to that statement.
So you're saying future modeling efforts consider county collection data flow, and if we want to add uncertainties, that's something different?
Yeah, because that just, what is that? So I would just get rid of that and then make a new bullet if you have another thing that you want to talk about.
In our discussions, I believe the future uncertainties is considering changes in precipitation patterns, for instance. I don't disagree with separating them, but I think that's why certain future uncertainties was included in this.
That's my recollection.
They were 2 separate strategies. They were combined here because they were both related to future modeling updates. But yeah, separate things to be included. So makes sense to include them as separate metrics too.
Yeah, and I think that the uncertainties in precipitation and maybe land use patterns was the other one I heard a lot in this group. Maybe aren't addressed through modeling, and maybe they're addressed in other ways.
Can you just use the same language that we have in the strategy? Changing weather patterns, population growth, water use scenarios.
Future water use scenarios, was that it, Catherine?
Water use scenarios, etc.
Okay.
And does land use need to be in there?
I think it was a major topic of discussion in this group. It was one of the ones I had in my mind.
Because that's what we're seeing in the impacts of development and explosion in development and mass grading and other things associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
So are we considering these for revisions to the model, revisions to the plan, revisions to what? What do you guys think?
So I thought, my recollection was we had a lot of discussion about improving technical information to improve models as they march forward. So like this future modeling efforts consider county collected flow data. My knowledge, that's Greenville County. They're the only ones I know that are collecting any flow data that we talked about. So I don't know if and I don't know where the whole mesoscale weather data comes into this. I think it would be under this. So I don't know if this doesn't need to be more. We support or how we would identify our support of these new or improved data sets to help in these efforts more so than what we've said here. Does that make sense? Because I don't know, Kurt and Grace, are those concepts covered in other matrix? Or are they all here in 3?
I think they're probably going to all be here in 3.
Yeah.
Because this is the one that focuses on technical understanding. Would it make more sense perhaps to kind of lump these and say future modeling and technical analysis, consider the following, and then list county collection flow data, mesoscale, mesonet data, and then these uncertainties that we've listed? Is that more directed?
Do we go up into 3 and say improve technical data and understanding?
Yeah, I like
Interesting.
that.
Yeah.
Are everybody okay with changing the objective?
Concur.
All right, John might throw a flag on the play, but we're going to go ahead and do it.
You got to be present to have a say in this.
I completely agree. I look at this as an opportunity to make sure we're getting as much as we can reflective of your views, and until we publish this plan, we can make amendments. So with that change, does that clarify some of these metrics a little bit more?
Yeah.
Okay. There's another set here for this one, and I'm gonna add this again here. And I know the numbering's off. We'll fix that later. Generally supportive U.S. stream flow gauges. See the making sure information is available to RBC and public, and financial impacts of sedimentation. Is that a pretty good list overall?
Does have to recommend.
I don't
I don't know.
think so.
Nice.
Scott?
Which one are you on?
D.
3D.
Do we need that prepositional phrase again?
Back on
I
back.
didn't even know it was.
Wow, I didn't know.
I mean, I'd say in most cases, yeah, that data would be available, but I don't know if I can say that 100%. I don't know.
The question is, does DES need to recommend placement of a stream gauge?
Or maintenance, like.
Or maintenance.
Why do they have to,
Right.
why do we need that in there?
So it's that highlighted area. Do we need that highlighted?
Sorry.
I think for context that this probably came out of a discussion such that an RBC didn't find itself crosswise with the stated plans or availability of funds from DES.
But there are plenty of USGS sites that aren't funded and aren't driven by DES.
Right.
To me, it would be interesting for us as an RBC to monitor the number of stream gauges and note if one is added or reduced. To me, it's an indicator that quantitatively could probably be misguiding. But to me, it would be interesting, at least for us, to note changes in the system. We proposed some additions, but to me, it would be at least interesting for us to monitor. Monitor what's happening there.
So it's not just additions and removals, it's also continued maintenance, because there are many stream gauges that are installed, they're operated for a couple of years because there's a grant for them, and then they just sit.
So by additions and removals, I mean the addition or the removal of their data on, the current data online. So it's in the spirit of what you're saying. However, we need to word that.
I don't think we need that SCDS recommends as such in there necessarily. I think we would, DS may get more money for gauges, and someone's gonna have to prioritize. And so it's gonna be statewide recommendations on that, so y'all make the recommendations. If we get money, we'll have to prioritize and weigh the different.
What I'm hearing is we don't need this phrase here.
I don't think so, unless y'all just think it's a good idea. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, my statement of us being aware of it was kind of independent, so it's FTDES, regardless of who's funding it. What's being similar thing they're not maintained what.
Do we want to, as an RBC, make a comment about the mesoscale weather data? Trying to get that in place.
That's a recommendation, and it didn't end up at all in the 5-year matrix. I don't know why.
It is a recommendation in the
In chapter
report.
9, it's not in chapter 10.
Well, that's what I thought I was reading. So it needs to be added in both places?
Yeah, I think you're right, Catherine. I think it's in the recommendations in chapter 9, but it did not make its way into the implementation table.
We can adjust that.
I've got to say, then I would encourage us to put it in the table. And I would encourage us to at least mention that as an RBC, we will support in the manner that is appropriate to support. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if there's any pending legislation to fund this, if that's all kind of behind the scenes. Just a DES DNR funding opportunity. But I think we should somehow identify we're going to encourage that to be put in place for South Carolina.
So Casey, what would you prefer as a metric here? Something that you can measure yourselves against or measure the state against? Do you want to measure, is the state embarking on this program, or is the RBC doing what it can to advocate for it?
Something worded appropriately to what you just said.
Let me try this. Is that fair?
I think so.
Okay, we again, we can play with the words a little bit, but we want to capture these themes.
And when we go to add this to the implementation table, are those generally the actions that you want represented? Some action about the RBC advocating for this, and then an action for the state to authorize funding?
If there's a mechanism for us to do that, that's what I don't know. And we'll have to have a conversation, I think, with Hope to see what that looks like.
So Grace, we can talk about how we can maybe include a couple of options in the table for the group to look at.
Sounds good.
All right. Just keeping an eye on the clock. We have 3 more of these to move through, but they're shorter. Let's talk about metrics for protecting water resources. We had identified 3 that might be appropriate. The primary sources of sediment loading to reservoirs are identified. Measures are put in place by local governments to prevent sediment loading into reservoirs. I highlighted the word prevent for some discussion. Is it reduce, minimize? What word do we want to use there if we want to use this? And the Saluda RBC has communicated with Saluda hydro operators regarding the hydrologic impairment below Saluda Lake. And Casey, I know that was a topic that you flagged in one of the chapters. We'll talk about that in a little while as we're talking about response to comments, so that may be relevant here too.
Yep. Well, the first thing that just pops into my mind on this is from the previous one where we talk about sediment loading and the financial. Does that really stay in the previous one, or does it come over here since?
Yeah, I thought about that too the first time I read it, Casey, and I realized that this is the one you're talking about here, I think. Where did it go? Here we go, the financial impact of sediments. I read that as technical understanding of impacts, which is what that objective is all about. And I read this other one as actually doing something to protect the resources themselves. So I see that they're related, but I think that the metrics are a little bit different. But I'll see if people agree with that or not.
Yep. Yep. You win.
All right, good. I'll take that. That's what this is all about, right?
Kurt winning.
That's right. That's right. Let me ask a question about the word prevent, though. Is that too strong, or is that something you want to strive for?
In my opinion, it is too strong, because I don't know that you can prevent sediment loading. That's just, if no land disturbing activities, there would still be sediment transport down a river stream, and you can't prevent that unless you just cannot prevent it. So I would have a different modifier, but I don't quite know what it is. I don't know whether the manage is correct, whether it is control.
Yeah, is it manage or reduce or minimize or control or?
I like mitigate.
I like the word
Mitigate. I heard mitigate.
Becca gets credit for that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, she.
Is that the prevailing opinion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, Casey, anything on letter C here? Again, we're going to come back and talk about this with the group when we discuss comments on the report, but is that appropriate here?
I made a comment on the report where it said we will work with the hydro operator to address this hydrologic impairment. And that is certainly the most logical opportunity for it. But that isn't the only opportunity. So I don't know if we don't, our matrix isn't more along the lines of making efforts to remove this hydrologic impairment on Saluda Lake.
So you're saying more than communicate, you want to measure if the impairment is improved or removed?
Well, I think that the matrix is, are we making efforts to have that removed? And again, to me, there are a couple options of how that potentially could occur. So I don't,
Okay.
Like you're saying the goal should be removal, not how we do it. It's just our goal should be to remove that impairment, right?
Get one done.
You approach that instead of C.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm typing both of them together and we can choose, kind of suggesting that D replace C here. If the end goal is the removal of the impairment, the means to that really is covered in the implementation plan and others. But this is the metric, is the impairment removed?
yes.
Is that fair?
How are you going to go about what I guess is going to become C?
Well, again, that's part of the implementation plan. These are not measuring or recommending actions themselves. They're just asking the question when you meet in 2 or 3 years, is that impairment removed?
And C is I think the first goal.
Channel.
Okay, you got some.
Now,
Oh,
I have some findings.
The question here is, do you want to keep both of these or do you want to consolidate it into D?
I would say consolidate into D, but that's my own.
I agree.
Okay.
That's my tendency to keep it simple and keep it direct. And that doesn't exclude you being active in it, but that's more of an implementation issue and not a question that you'd ask later.
And back to B, as Melanie put in her comments, maybe to mitigate and minimize sediment loading to reservoirs.
People okay with that?
That's fine. I mean, I'm not sure how you can minimize what's above you and you don't own it, but that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We're at 11:15, which is what we had planned to go to. We've only got 2 more of these and they're both a little short. Are people okay going to 11:30 before we take a break? Try to do these.
Yes, please do.
Okay. Number 5, improved drought management. And the metric here, I think that some of the other RBCs have gravitated toward is 100%. I think we could put a number there rather than words. 100% of public water suppliers' drought management plans are updated within the last 5 years and submitted to the State Climate Office for review.
I can see
I
this
just think mine is you,
advocated.
so yeah, we get
Ours left here, so we're good.
I'm hearing some agreement. Are the heads in the room nodding?
No, I'm the one that every time. You may not when you were there.
He is now, but not previous.
15 years.
I wasn't there.
You've been there a while.
I was there for the first one.
I don't have a problem with that. I don't think anybody
He was
they're
there
running a water system would have a problem with that.
Heads generally nodding there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just laughing.
They're just arguing with who was where when the last one took place.
Okay. We can make a list of exceptions here and list people by name if we need to, but I don't think we need to go that far.
Every 5 years now, Casey.
Let's take a look at this last one. We've looked at this a little bit already. This is the promoting engagement in the water planning process. Again, priority number 2 here. Again, making sure people are aware of it. Casey, I think this focuses a little bit more on the education, outreach, and a number of people were talking about that distinction, not necessarily with groups that are doing it, but not excluding those. So the RBC continues beyond 2025 with a diverse, active, and representative membership with 90% of seats filled. We can talk about that number. And coordination occurs with groups that have existing education and outreach efforts focused on water planning. This is the one we talked about moving up into the second one as well.
B's great.
Do we know the number of seats we're supposed to
Yeah,
have?
is it supposed to be 25? That would be 23.
That's a little tight.
Well, we started off at 27, didn't we?
But we're the
I think
largest,
we're close to 30
but we're the largest, aren't we?
Yeah.
currently.
There's a mandate that we have that many.
There's not a mandate. There's a mandate of how small we should be. which I think is the 25 from the framework.
Is it more important to suggest that all 8 designated water use categories maintain membership rather than the percentage of seats that are filled?
I think that's what ours
Stop that
says.
conversation.
I think ours is more that than number and
Representation from all angles.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
And probably needs to make sure there's multiple.
Do you want at least
representatives. I don't
two
know what you want to put in
representatives
number.
from each?
Do we want? Yes.
Well, I think we should have at least one.
Yeah, I think. Well, I'd say, yeah, required one. Well, if we can't get one, does that mean we're gonna dissolve as an RBC?
No.
Does it just mean we're not gonna be able to check this box?
No, just
That's
that's
what I'm
all.
looking at.
And
And
it
should
may
be
be
something
lead us
we're
to an
working
action to encourage someone to.
And I'm not above kidnapping.
Well, and so, yeah, I think there's absolutely a place for the RBC to solicit folks in areas that
Next
we
year.
don't have representation. The biggest problem I think we're all aware of is industry. You know, I think on other RBCs, they struggled with that as well. All we can do is really encourage that PPAC/Water SC or whoever the group is, I guess DES technically puts members on the board or on the council. So
We've already said these are metrics that maybe we can't control.
yeah,
They're what they are.
Yeah, that's right. This is just a way that you would come back and ask, 5 years, are we still a thriving group? Do we still have balanced representation? Have we included some new relevant groups? And again, it's a way of assessing whether you're succeeding in the plan or falling short in some categories. It wouldn't necessarily dissolve the RBC. If any of these came back as negative, it would just elevate the importance of that objective to turn it around.
It's Catherine. Can you add a comma after active, please? And then delete the comma after categories. And just because I'm trying to read it as like an outsider, and it almost sounds like we want to solicit additional groups outside of the 8 categories. So I would just say solicit additional membership where there are gaps or where we are underrepresented or something along those lines. I think that adds clarity.
So as a,
Yeah, that's fine.
so, excuse me, but as a metric, I don't know that we need to have the and solicit in there. I don't know that that is a metric unless you're going to measure how many solicitations you make.
Mm-hmm. That's more of an action.
As a goal,
Do we ignore it? Do we ignore the problem or do we like actually?
the goal is to have an active representative membership with balanced representation from all 8 water use categories. That's the metric. Do you have an active representative membership with balanced representation from all 8 water use categories? That's your metric.
Yeah, you're right.
Then the implementation is.
if we don't,
And then Kathy,
by default,
she
we've
just
got to
gets on the
go.
phone, she keeps calling until she gets it.
Are people suggesting that we just leave it at categories?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the term water use categories the same term that we use in the framework?
I think so. I'm pulling it out of my head, but I think it is. Grace, can you confirm or deny that?
Thought it was-
Tom, Scott, anybody?
Sectors, I think, is what we usually use.
Sectors, you're right. I think you're right. We'll check that and make sure we get it right.
So, Robert Hanley again.
Yep.
B is coordination. A is active. I'm gonna go right back to the first one we used in that I do not see a metric for public outreach. Coordination, in my opinion, is a little different than public outreach, and I think the RBC should have as a metric that we are actively working to engage the public, and maybe that is someplace else in there. But I think as a metric, we have, what is the RBC doing for public outreach?
I think that regardless of whether it's embodied in other objectives, it has a place here. I don't see any problem with a little bit of overlap if people are comfortable with this. And I think you're right. Coordination does not necessarily mean active outreach. Are people okay with that concept?
Yes.
Catherine, do we need any comments?
She's reading.
It looks like the language is interest categories.
There we go. Water interest categories. Thank you.
Erase.
Out of three words, I got two of them wrong. That erases my earlier victory. All right.
Categories.
Categories. Okay, I got two of them right.
And I don't need water. It's not water. It's just 8.
So I completely blew it.
One word, but didn't know about.
I think we all would have failed this if it was an actual test, so I've not gotten that right.
I gotta suggest that John do that on his pop quiz next time. What are the things called? Okay. I'm going to suggest that we wrap up this exercise. It again doesn't need to be perfect, but I want to make sure that it includes the things that you think are important. I think we got a lot of good feedback on this. Are people generally satisfied with these metrics, considering them as questions that you would ask yourself in a few years?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
so Kurt,
Thank you for your patience on that. Let's take about a 10-minute break. Come back at 11:40.
one suggestion, and that is someone go through these and do parallel structure of the goals. Right now, the goals do not have parallel structure, and I think it would all be benefited, or the metrics, I think it would be beneficial that they have parallel structure.
I agree with that.
And then my request is that there's a re-release of chapter 10 and that we don't
That's what I'm
review the
fixing.
one that we've been sent because enough change has occurred that I feel like it's a waste of time to ask people to review chapter 10 without these changes incorporated. Please.
That's fair.
And Kurt, lunch is here, so I think it's probably a good time to pause for lunch.
Pause for lunch. Okay, that sounds good. What time would folks like to get back together?
It's 11:30. We usually go about 25 minutes, 11:55-ish.
Okay, that'll give us about an hour to go through some comments. I've chosen some select comments that we can talk about and talk about how we can resolve all of the other comments. So I think that'll be enough time, and enjoy your lunch. We'll see you shortly.
Thank you. 11:55. We'll return.
All right, we good, Tom?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, thanks, everybody. We've got a couple more hours to go and a number of topics to discuss. There's the next hour, I think probably we will spend on the comments on the report to date. What I've done, let's see, there we go. What I've done is, first of all, commended you on the thoroughness of your comments. I'll share a little anecdote. John and I years ago worked together on a state water plan in Connecticut. And for the whole state, we had something like 1,800 comments. We have at least 450 for the chapters that you've reviewed so far. That far surpasses any of the other river basin councils. And if you were to prorate that across the state for all 8 basins, you'd be double what the state of Connecticut had. So I do appreciate that. I appreciate your thoroughness. And I hope you'll understand that we can't get to each and every one of those today in our discussion. So there are 3 things to think about. I have gone through the list of comments and taken 10 that I feel are relevant. It's a good diversity of people, good mix of subject matters and chapters in the report. And a lot of these were recurring themes in the comments. So I thought it would be useful for us to talk about this group in this setting. And that can give us some context as we go ahead and make further revisions to the report and as you continue your reviews. The way to ultimately basically agree with or not agree with these, a couple things we can do. If there are topics here that we can resolve today one way or the other, I think we can put some certain things to vote by majority. If we don't want to do that, we can take your feedback and bring it back into the report. And ultimately your concurrence is expressed in your vote for the report. And people can vote to, we'll talk about this a little bit later, vote to support the report as is, or support it with some minor or significant reservations. We'll talk about what that all means. But I know that some of you will spend time going through all 450 plus comments and more coming in and seeing how they're resolved. We do have this log. It was sent out on the 17th, so a few days ago. So you'll have that in its current state. It will continue to evolve. We can make it available to you to see how the relevant text in the report, the comment or question that was posed by the reviewer, and then our response to that, how we'll address it or not address it, or bring it back to the group for some discussion. So today, like I said, I've chosen 10. We have an hour to go through these. We'll get through as many as we can. I would like to leave some time for others, but I hope that the discussion will be enough to advance our revisions of the report at CDM and give you the information you need to continue to review it. Is that a fair way to go?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So this is the format that the comment log is in. For those of you who have seen it, it doesn't always have the purple column, the relevant text. I brought that in today. We're not going to be working off this slide. I pulled each of these 10 comments off individually so that we can talk about them. And again, I think some of them just bear discussion. Some of them probably can be resolved quickly, but others are recurring themes, and I wanted to include as many reviewers as possible and as many topics and chapters. So let's get into it. This is basically what I've done to pull the comment out. And I'll say this one more time and then I'll stop saying it, but this is not everything. This is what I feel are representative comments that can bear some discussion in this format. So the first one, I'll be calling people out by name. This is in chapter 2, and all of this information is in the comment log. The line number is the line number that you'll find it in the comment log. The page number is the initial page of the report. That may have changed as we've gone through and addressed some comments. The paging can change a little bit. But Catherine had a comment on this text: the North, Middle, and South Saluda tributaries, as well as several mountain lakes in the basin, are stocked with a mix of rainbow brook trout, brown trout, among other popular recreational fish. And the comment, and this was a comment that really came through in a lot of different ways and a lot of different chapters, is it just fish? Are there other species? Are there plants? And the answer is yes, there are other species, there are plants. In the report, I'll just read kind of how our draft response reads, and then we can talk about how appropriate or not it is, or agreeable or not. The assessment that was done in the report, we'll get to that later on, chapter 5 and later, was focused specifically on fish. There is a paragraph in a table, I think, that follows this text in chapter 2 that does list some other species, non-aquatic species, and things like that. A lot of questions about macroinvertebrates that come up. And so the question, I think, back to you, Catherine, is that would you like to see some additional mention other than the paragraphs that follow the purple text here in the report, knowing that there is a table of endangered species and of different categories, terrestrial, aquatic. Is there something else that you'd like to see there?
So my comment is actually on the first sentence of that paragraph, which states the rivers and tributaries of the Saluda River Basin are the most ecologically diverse for fish in South Carolina, with 84 species of freshwater fish present. So my question isn't like, I'm not questioning the fish discussion. I'm more saying, like, is the Saluda River Basin also the most ecologically diverse for other species that should be noted in this, like, beginning sentence to introduce the whole ecological value as a whole.
Okay,
That's what I was getting at.
okay, I see what you're saying. I'll talk with John about that and the source for this information. I don't know if we have the data to say that right now, but let me get back with John on that. Is that all right?
Yeah, I mean, it was just me asking the question if
Yeah, yeah.
noting.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. You're good.
Okay, I was gonna say, I think you're right. If we have data to support that, it's worth mentioning. So I'll check on that.
I believe that comment came from one of our presenters who did say the Saluda River has the most diverse fish population of the river basins. I would agree with you. I don't think there would be data to support that same statement for other flora and fauna. The Saluda River has a more diverse benthic macroinvertebrate fauna than other river basins in the state.
Okay. Okay. We'll do a little research on that.
But they're pointing out that the Saluda River Basin does have the most diverse fish fauna of the river basins in the state. I think that is valuable information that you pointed out.
Whoops. Okay. Okay, but I think so. We'll definitely leave it in there. And Catherine, I apologize for misconstruing the comment. I thought it was more of the text that I've highlighted in purple here. But let me circle back with John on that and see if we do have any data.
No big deal.
Okay. Okay. I'm just taking some notes.
Kurt, just to help you with your research, it seems like there was a graph that showed the basin and kind of went from orange color down to green on the eco diversity of that area. And I part of it is in the Blue Ridge, that it may have been extensive for all flora and fauna, not just fish. But that's just an image I have as you go through slides.
Yeah.
You may see that slide.
Do you remember who the speaker may have been there, Casey?
It may have been one of the three Clemson fellows, the one who showed the fish spawning video.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll research that and see what we can come up with, because I think it is important. Anything that distinguishes this basin from others. Okay. Next one was a comment from Josie. I think this is pretty easy to resolve, but I wanted to make sure people were okay with it. It's a very good point. This comes up a lot in technical writing. And this was a general comment on chapter 2, and I think in other places in the report. There are a few times where the text refers to current or at the time of this document. Well, in 10 years, is that understandable to people? So I went through this chapter and changed a couple of references to say as of 2024 or at the time of publication. And I think the date stamp on the cover of the report should help clarify that. But I don't know, Josie, if you were in the meeting today, are there other ways that you would suggest we handle that, or is this okay?
This is fine with me. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for calling that out. I appreciate that, because I found myself frustrated innumerable times by reports that say, as of now, well, okay, when is that? Okay, next one, KC, this was one we talked about earlier in the metrics. Do you want to give a little background here? So I don't have to read the whole thing and bore everybody. Do you want to give a little background on this and explain the comment and kind of pose the questions that you have?
Okay. So if you go back and read the petition for putting the impairment on DHEC, and since that time, there's really been no work on the issue at hand. It was an impairment was put on in, was it 17 from the original, and there's been no work by DHEC/DES or anybody else to readdress the impairment. And trying to think of what's.
Your comment was that after reading the section in the background, you wanted to discuss this some more before you made some of these statements. And I wasn't sure if you were referring to the statements about what the RBC members noted about the yacht club and the Parks Department having observed increasing impacts on tubing. Do you want to get more specific on that?
Yeah, I think some of that is more anecdotal. Type of document. I'm concerned about having anecdotal information, particularly on an impairment. I don't know if that needs to be tweaked a certain way, or if we're confident as RBC of saying this. So that was my comment.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I understand exactly where you're coming from. Is it because so much of the report does focus on numbers and quantities and things? Is it appropriate maybe to make this point, but to stand it aside a little bit with the caveat that says, you know, this is anecdotal. Just be very blunt about it. Say something like the frequency and severity of low flows appears to have increased in recent years, or is perceived to have increased. Or do you really want to back away from these observations altogether?
Can that not be, this is Josie, can that not be quantified? I mean, it's gauge data. Everything but the last sentence should be correct.
Was in the request.
Yeah, in 17, but we're almost 10 years down the road. And I can't see there's been any review of the impairment since then.
And I am voting in that stretch frequently. And my personal observation is they are dropping it to about 20%. 20% of mean annual daily flow is about what they're dropping it to at minimum. Whereas before in 2017, they were going lower. Now, I think the claim was that about 35% was needed for navigation. And so they were comparing the number of days there, and that's kind of where some of these discussions on mineral midstream flow to be. And honestly, I'm compromising there if we discuss it with them. But my observation for that stretch was that I do not see them, because I'm reviewing it pretty frequently. I do not see them dropping it below the 20% median flow very often. Now, when I look at the dam below Boyd Mill Pond, if the river data there, I say, hey, maybe this stretch should be added to the list. And there is no gauge below Holiday now, so we have no way of knowing, which is why I suggested we add it. So to me, I kind of think about where maybe it's already solved at this location, but to me, that's what talking with them about the general operation practices, you know, and maybe informally, I can't say, hey, we should go have these other sites because I don't know that I've got the data to support it. But the other problem is if you're looking at average daily flow versus instantaneous flow, you sometimes see different stories. But I can tell you, having a great day on the stretch of the Saluda one day where it went from, well, they went from generating down to that 20% tons. I had a long
So I don't know if we need to add, like say, language in here. Several members commented that their personal experience was this, but to qualify it somehow.
Okay.
anecdotal, I did like his suggestion of saying that there's anecdotal statements, but I also. Maybe this is something I can assist with, you know, to me, I think that there's some. There could be a revisit, the problem with revisiting it is just because we see that they haven't for the past year. Maybe that's cause water, you know, to me, without some discussion with them. Yep. And at least some agreement. I'm not so in favor of removing it just because I looked at the past year's data and didn't see anything. That's certainly fair.
So what is the, what is the metric that says it's impaired? The level of macroinvertebrates? But looking at it from a recreation.
It's based on water flow. It's based on the CFS flow at the gauge. And the determination that the way they were operating, it reduced the number of days that it was navigable. There were also the anecdotal parts was that there were cases where they were clearly dropping it below the 20% at that time frame, and they would see invertebrates and so forth. People with tubers could not the business, you just had to pick up the tubes, walk downstream, there was no notification. As well as the invertebrates that just see them kind of drying up on the shore.
So in my opinion, Rick, the original petition that got approved didn't have hard data like that behind it. It was much more the two organizations saying this is impacting us because flow gets below that, and DHEC agreed. It wasn't hard data.
There were some studies in there that looked at how much flow was necessary for navigation.
Yeah, I don't know if that was ever made it to the petition.
The petition, maybe not, maybe not. Yeah, Melanie sent me a bunch of data that I went through that was not in the final report. There was a lot of data that was presented here that was not in the petition.
I mean, yeah, Melanie's probably best to speak to this. Melanie, can you unmute or?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
There most certainly was hard data in the petition, and I'm glad to rescind that petition. That was way back in 18, so you know we didn't have the luxury of looking into the future. So we looked at data from the 2011 to 2016. I used the old hydrologic studies that define some thresholds, and I looked at the percentages of days that were below those different thresholds and looked at those trends, and those percentage of days that they fell below those thresholds was increasing, you know, from 32% in 11, 12 it was down, and then 15, 17%, 16, 44% days below the 212 threshold. But you're right, this has not been updated since that time using more recent data. If you pull up the graph and just look at the hydrograph, it does look like they're releasing more than they have in the past. It would be interesting to rerun these stats. You know, I'm glad to dig up my old spreadsheets and do that if you think that's something we should do for this report. But to say that there was no hard data in the petition is just, and that it was based on anecdotal because we thought so, is simply not accurate.
Yeah, no, I think, Melanie, the question is not the data in the report. I think we can cite some of that if you're able to resend that. I think the anecdotal information is what kind of came below that. You know, RBC members' personal experience, the yacht club, and so forth. Maybe we say that they are suggesting that these problems are continuing, and that's more anecdotal than hard numbers. So I would suggest, based on what I'm hearing from everybody, that we do include some references or citations to some of the numbers that were used in the 2018 petition, but say also that through the RBC process, a number of members noted that these conditions through their perception and experience appear to be persisting. Is that a fair way to kind of wrap it up?
Let me correct something I said, because as Melanie stated, it was that data in the petition. A lot of that key data was not in the decision. Which is a lot more, which you can publicly find. I cannot find online the original petition.
That's what I have read, that their DHEC's response.
The DHEC's response did not include a lot of that data, which I thought was probably fundamental to justifying the decision. But
Yeah, I think I shared the petition early on to the group. And like I said, it really wouldn't be that hard to go back and rerun the numbers and see how those percentages have changed. See if we agree on the thresholds, or if we want to look at different thresholds. But I don't know, we're pretty late in the game, and it's
I think more appropriate though, we've got a statement that we want to remove the impairment, and I think it's fair in our implementation plan that perhaps
To say we'll show that,
yes,
yeah.
that we look at the recent bids. At the same time, well, like I said before, without any discussions, I'm a little bit hesitant to just say remove it and then have them go back to operating the old way without any dialogue.
Yeah. Well, one thing to keep in mind is that this chapter is just a summary of current and historical conditions. You're not making any recommendations here. That's later in the report. So I think that the question is, are the more recent data kind of confirming the continuance of this impairment?
yeah.
And would people be comfortable adding a little bit of quantitative assessment if Melanie's able to do that to this paragraph?
I think we can just cite the original data and note that it needs to be reassessed.
I think that's the most.
That would really be more appropriate. It's really not our charge to provide data to list or delist any segment. I mean, golly, I could probably generate a ton of data to list streams today.
No, and this isn't the format.
Yeah, this is not the format for that. You're right.
Or the venue for
Yeah,
that.
but to direct DHEC or whomever to take a look at that. And I mean, what are they doing for all of the other listed water bodies that are impaired?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Grace, you and I can maybe take a pass through this and kind of incorporate what we've heard here and let everybody review it again as they finalize the report.
Sounds good. Can merge our notes.
Okay. All right, good discussion. Thank you, everyone. Okay, this was a comment from Rebecca on chapter 3. This again is the water resources chapter. It's background information, kind of current conditions assessment report. The text that was commented on was a list of some of the other concerns that have been raised by RBC members during this the course of your deliberations. Rapid population growth, releases from non-FERC hydropower facilities, droughts of increasing severity, loss of riparian buffers, and changing climate conditions. And Rebecca said that she would like to be considered that several RBC members have expressed concern about the current Surface Water Withdrawal Act and the ability, or basically the fully permitted and registered planning scenario. That is a viable concern that has come up and maybe belongs in this list with the other concerns as basically an uncertainty or an issue that needs to be addressed. So again, this isn't a recommendation to do anything with it. I think the comment is, does the RBC feel that this concern belongs in this list of quote unquote other surface water related concerns? And I think that's where what we're suggesting is we added, the blue text there will be added to that list of other concerns, along with a reference that it's evaluated in quantitative detail in section 5 and beyond. So Rebecca, I don't know if you're on the call today either, or in the meeting in the room, but if there's anything that you wanted to add to that, please feel free. And if anybody has reactions or suggestions, let's talk about this.
Hi, Kirk. I'm in the room today. I think you did a good job summarizing my thoughts there. I think it's been a while since I made this comment. But I do think that the draft response we have is appropriate. However, I'm open to discussing it with the group. Again, this is just a concern that I think represents a couple of people's opinions. And if it's just those couple, maybe it's not appropriate in this context, but if people think it's appropriate, it just was something that resonated with me and I was making a comment.
Yeah, thanks for that context, Rebecca. How do others feel about including this as just among the list of issues that face the Saluda River Basin?
This is Thompson, and of course, I don't think it comes as any surprise to anybody that I would oppose including.
So could you say that one more time? It didn't quite register here on my end. I apologize.
I oppose including it.
Okay.
Well, this is a good step, and I think the draft comment adequate somewhat. But it comes back to the real issue at hand, is it's using what is the metric here? And we continue to keep going back to safe yield as being how we evaluate, surface water withdrawal. We know that that's not based on science or any reality. And, so that comes back to the problem with the term or how way we use safe yield as the measuring stick for how much water is adequately in the river.
Okay. And again, I appreciate that, Thompson. It came through this time. Again, I don't think we are suggesting or promoting or proposing anything here. It's just a list of issues like the ones above: population growth, droughts getting worse. And I think what's being proposed here is just to include this as a recognized concern that we actually address quantitatively with the modeling later in the report. I don't think it's suggesting an alternative or, critiquing or really offering a pathway away from this or anything different. It's just acknowledging that this is, it's an issue. And one of the charges of the RBC was to deal with this.
In the intro, it says identified by one or more RBC member, which means it's been identified, it should be included. It says one or more. It doesn't say consensus.
Right.
Here, this is just something that's arisen.
These are things that have come up through the course of your deliberations and dialogue. And again, they're not prioritized, they're not recommendations in any way. It's just a list of the things that you've talked about.
I mean, some of this turned into a recommendation, but this is literally just stuff under recommendations. I mean,
yeah, we're in the context of the report, we're way behind the recommendations here. Yeah, this is really just even before a lot of the planning process itself. What are some of the things that you as a group talked about? Thompson, are you a little more comfortable including it in that context?
No, not at all, because nowhere does it say that only 2 people talked about that. It's up there as something that, I didn't understand the discussion that way, but anything that was brought up in discussion should be included in the report, whether it had any merit or not.
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying here without, you know, putting a spin on it or a recommendation. It's just stating this is something that the RBC talked about. It was a concern that was brought up by at least one member. Is there one that you would suggest to sort of accompany this that you don't see on the list?
So when, at the start of this, it says, other surface water concerns have been raised. What were the ones raised before the other? I don't know what came before this, what the conversation was to know what we're talking about. I don't recall. I'll have to go back and read chapter 3.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if the previous 3 paragraphs were all about the law, then it doesn't make sense to put it in here. I just don't recall.
Yeah, I believe we were talking about the basically water availability.
It wasn't the way I voted. I thought we had voted to include it on the way to include it. Some members thought.
The recommendations listed noted that it didn't get consensus.
Hey,
Again,
you were having a hard time hearing, so we got the air thing going on.
Yeah, it's a little hard.
in the recommendations, it was noted that we did not get consensus on a recommendation regarding this specifically. But again, context is brought up as a concern, like the others listed above it, like climate, riparian buffers, drought, other things. Again, yes, it was included in the recommendations that it did not get consensus. When we are stating a recommendation, again, this is the context of just the concern on.
This is Melanie. Can I add one more thing to this discussion? I don't mean to complicate, but something we didn't really talk about, but I've heard expressed in other forums is, what if we had some data centers to arrive that would really change the calculus of future demand, and that's a real possibility. So I just wanted to throw that one in there.
But does that belong with rapid population and industrial growth?
Yeah, so a data center is not necessarily tied to population growth. It's sort of its separate thing. Yeah, maybe industrial growth would capture that, I suppose.
So Melanie, this is Robert. I'm curious how a data center would affect our project. I know it would be a high energy demand, but that energy demand could be met by any number of mechanisms.
Also high water demand operations, right?
Air cooling is typically through HVAC systems, not through a chiller type system.
Not some of the ones that are coming up in the Savannah.
Yeah, okay. I stand corrected.
But my experience and from what I know is most of them have used municipal supply. They haven't gone to a river themselves. So really that demand would be supplied by somebody who already has a permit. So it would just be eating into their capacity more so than creating a new demand on a system. I'm sure there have been folks out there that have applied to get a water withdrawal permit. But it's not an easy task. And if somebody has excess capacity in their system, that's where it is.
Casey, would it be all encompassing to say, I don't want to leave the other point unresolved yet. We'll come back to it. But on this one, would it be fair to say rapid population and demand growth and just wrap it all up that way? Wherever that demand is coming from.
Mrs. Thompson, in the previous discussion that we just had, if it was one member's concern, whether it had merit or not, it's included.
I don't know if it's that part of the room that's having trouble with sound. I'm not able to hear. Tom, maybe can you summarize what we're hearing from that part of the room?
And he's saying, I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think he's saying one or two people are saying this, why is it in the report?
Why, yeah, well, what I'm saying is, why would we question it? Just put it in. It doesn't have to have a merit. As long as it's got one or two people's concern, that's what you told me. So
We also,
That's what we're proposing, yeah.
So does the bullet just need to be state water law and not the rest of the blue that they've been including?
Would that be a way to cover it?
or addressing Melanie's latest concern here about, you know, the data centers and stuff.
future my water.
So maybe I'll make a suggestion here. You know, this list doesn't have to be exhaustive, but these are topics that have come up repeatedly in the course of the planning process. And I would suggest we rephrase what we see in front of us here to rapid population and demand growth for that first bullet, and for the last one in blue, just current state water law. And we do discuss that later. We make recommendations on it, but not to get too specific. Keep it in line with the simplicity of the others. People be comfortable with that?
Sure. I can live with it, but again, if it is the concern of one or more members, is it not valid to be included?
Oh, yeah, I want to make sure it's included, but with the, you know, commensurate level of specificity of the others.
So the concern is the permits in the Surface Water Withdrawal Act, correct?
Yes.
So it can be on there, period.
No, but why though? Because all these others have.
We don't go into.
Yes, we do. Like we are actually looking at the actual chapter, it goes into detail. It's not just listed like that.
Exactly.
Don't we address the law in other parts? Maybe not in 3, but we certainly mention it. This isn't the only place it's being mentioned and.
That would have explanations that go with them, but I think on this slide, it's simplified for us for review. That's why I don't want to get rid of the explanation, if the other ones are actually explained in the chapter.
Yeah, you're right. These are paraphrased, but. But I think what I'm hearing is, because this isn't in the form of a specific recommendation yet, it is later in the report, that at this point, it's enough to say that at least some members of the RBC are concerned with state water law and permitting that process. People generally comfortable with that? Is that something that you could live with?
Got one no, the other no's. Can't live with it. It was one.
Great Thompson.
You could say something like the state water law and its risk of leading to over allocation or something like that, so that you know, so that there's a context for that, for including that bullet.
Okay. Because the rest either are described or the implications are implicit in what is said. So let's put that forward to the group. And if we don't have a full consensus on this, Casey, I'll leave it to you if you wanted to take a vote on it, or let us work on it a little bit more and get back to you. But I think what I put in front of the group is that the first bullet we changed to rapid population and demand growth to cover everything. And then the last one was just discussed state water law and its risk of over allocation.
Yeah, and I know there are other edits in those sections, so let's see how that impacts the flow of that. I'm not sure.
So you wanna hold off and debate it first? Or vote?
Let's edit it first.
Okay, so we'll edit it that way, and everybody can take a look at it in the context of the backdrop of the section that it's in. I think that's what I hear you saying, Casey.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Okay, good discussion. I appreciate that. Let's go on to the next one. This was one brought up by Kaylee. Kaylee, I don't know if you're in the room or online, but feel free to add to this. I think your suggestion was to include some sort of conclusion in chapter 3, which is the one we're talking about, the background on the water resources. And I think we certainly could take a try to doing that if the RBC thinks it's useful. I don't think we did in the other RBCs because of the broad nature of the background topics that we covered. It was range of all the good and the bad. So I think if it's something you feel strongly about, let's see if we can talk about it with the group. But let's have you weigh in if you're with us today, please.
Haley's not here, her alternate Haley's online. Haley, do you have a comment?
I don't know exactly how strongly she feels about it, but I can ask her and report back to you via email
Okay.
if that would be helpful. So probably not worth debating today unless anyone had unless anyone agrees that they would.
It's worth asking the group while we're here if
Yeah.
strong desire to have a 1-paragraph summary at the end of the chapter. I certainly wouldn't be averse to that.
Kurt, just again, I haven't read this chapter in a bit, but it is a for information chapter, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's sort of existing conditions, existing historical conditions.
Yeah.
And it is summarized in the executive summary as well, so much more concisely than the full chapter. Let me ask this: does anybody have a strong opinion not to include a concluding paragraph?
As long as you write it properly.
I will, Grace, why don't we take that on? Why don't we add it? And if it doesn't hit the mark, we try again or we remove it, but it wouldn't be that hard to do.
Thank you.
Just for information, do we have kind of conclusion paragraphs in all the other chapters?
I think some of them we do. The ones where we're looking at the overall availability of water, the uses. Sometimes they are sort of preview paragraphs. Sometimes they're more conclusion paragraphs. But I think there are some good summary paragraphs in other chapters that would reflect this. I don't think we do in some of the later chapters on recommendations because there's so many different topics, and the tables themselves are basically the conclusion sections.
I think I'm remembering this was also a comment on chapter 4, which was on the demands, and we did not include a summary there.
Okay.
But you could argue that there's a summary again somewhere else within the chapter. So just, is that enough?
Yeah, Grace, as long as you're willing, and I think you and I can draft a couple of paragraph summaries for those two sections. I think that might be helpful.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things that makes these reports useful is people are going to go to the graphs, they're going to go to the tables, and they're going to go to the beginning and ends. And so if there are some summary paragraphs buried in the report, maybe we move those to a place that's more accessible, or, as I said, Grace and I can draft these for chapter 3 and 4. Okay. This was a question from Catherine. We're now in chapter 4, which is the demand chapter, which we were just talking about. Catherine, your comment here was, according to the table, it assumed constant demand for mining, golf courses, and thermoelectric, and projections were not developed. I do want to clarify that they were developed. The state did do projections for those. It was just determined that through the projection process, that the demands appeared to be constant for those sectors. So I wanted to clarify that and ask if additional discussion on that is needed, or if just mentioning that more clearly in the text would be appropriate.
I'm trying to reorient myself to that comment.
It was one of your 3 comments, Catherine.
On that. Oh my gosh, there really were.
Yeah.
Again, I think I know what you were saying here, and I think it was a matter of clarification, but if you were concerned about the reasons behind the projections, that's one topic. If you were concerned that the projections weren't done, that's another one. And I wanted to assure you that they were done. They concluded that the demand for those sectors will be fairly stable.
Maybe that's just a note at the bottom of that table, just to clarify, because. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
It might contradict some language somewhere else, which might be why I brought it up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was going to suggest that too, that a footnote would be probably the most useful. Scott, are you in the room?
Yes.
I think I heard you. Any comments from you on that? Are we getting this right?
Yeah, your draft response looked right. They didn't increase over time, but there were assumptions made what the future use would be, it stays constant based on the scenario. So, yeah, so the moderate, which seems like a median value. The high demand is the maximum value based on period of record. It's like 10-year period.
So it did change.
From scenario to scenario, but within the moderate scenario, we assume a certain level of golf course use, mine use, it just stays constant through the 50-year planning horizon.
Constant within the scenario.
Yeah, constant within the scenario.
That's what's not clear. There it is. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't that was not how I interpreted it either. So I appreciate that, Scott.
Brought me back. Yeah, it makes it seem like it's the same in both, the way it's presented. For me.
Okay, we will clarify that. Appreciate that from both of you. Okay, this is another one from Casey. Now we're on to chapter 5, which is water management strategies. Casey, your question here was, are the biological performance indicators truly quantitative? We make a statement in the middle of that purple text: a performance measure is a quantitative measure of a change in user-defined condition from an established baseline. And you were questioning, are they really quantitative? And our draft response was, yeah, they are, because they actually relate quantitative flow to quantitative predictive changes in habitat and species. But I'm kind of questioning that myself. I think this is more, well, I would suggest perhaps they're more quasi-quantitative, but I'd like to hear a little discussion on that.
Well, that's kind of how I was looking at it, because they are not firmly defined in the science yet. It's still an early science. To me, it's quasi.
Mm-hmm.
So, Casey, could you help me? Are you specifically measuring the flow ecology relationship discussion?
Yep.
Okay, all right. I would not disagree with that is in a stage, but there are definitely quantitative biological measures that do have a statistical basis from which you can compare two different populations, or you can compare trends over time.
Yes, I don't know if those correlate to the work that's being done to say, because it worked over here, we can project it over here and it be quantitative.
So I would agree with that, that the flow ecology relationship work is not yet at a point where you can say it is truly quantitative. But I would want to be very careful how we measure, how we state this in the text.
Yeah.
So we're not suggesting that there are not quantitative measures for determining biological health or of a population, and quantitative measures that can track changes over time or changes within a river basin itself based on distance.
Would it be fair to say that there are quantitative measures that are used to produce quantitative indicators? That maybe softens it a little bit in terms of using the numbers as a predictive measure?
It's actually reversed because it's the indicators that determine.
Okay.
You follow an indicator approach, which are well defined for both fishes and benthic macroinvertebrates. You do certain metrics on the population, and you can then statistically analyze those metrics to see if there are differences over time, or if there are differences between a reference reach and a test reach.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really what was done here. The whole bio thing was just very confusing to me, and I took kind of a deep dive into it a couple weeks ago. Let me see if I can refresh my understanding of it. So they took a lot of hydrologic parameters, and they took a lot of biological parameters, and they looked at them together to see where they saw correlations. And where they saw correlations, they selected those hydro parameters to use as indicators. And then they did some computer generated, the tree learning and to generate. There just seems to be a lot of big black box stuff, the way the bio, I'm sorry, this is something I should have raised a long time ago, but I was just confused at the time, and it never has really squared straight in my mind how this is done. So every basin has a different set of metrics that are used for determining if the different set of hydrometrics, a different set of biometrics, and it just seems overly complex. And I mean, this is just a moot point because we're too far down the line with this. But I'm having a real hard time understanding how the methodology presented is really going to be something that we can hang our hat on going forward, when there's already, like Rob said, these very established methods that are already used for determining an impairment based on reference, and especially with a strong preference. That's what DHEC uses, is the macroinvertebrates, because they're sessile, so they are indicative of that fish can travel, macroinvertebrates cannot. So sometimes some basins use different hydro and different. It just, I would agree that it is quasi. This is not not a completely quantitative method here that was used to get us to biological impairment.
Could I make a comment on this? I know that this is, and I haven't been in every meeting. Obviously, Kaylee and I have alternated, but I know that this has come up a couple of times since we've had those guest speakers. And unless we have some pretty established fisheries biologists in the room, I really think we should seek clarification from the scientists to ask these questions, because we're making a lot of speculations that I don't know that we all have the exact expertise to answer. And I think if we sought clarification from those that presented on their work, we would get a better answer. And maybe it is, the gaps are where we think, but I just worry that we're having a lot of conversations internally that we can't answer with our expertise.
Yeah,
because this is new research, so none of us have done it before, and I don't know that we really have the context to answer that.
Yeah, and it was
That's just
research
my opinion.
done in support of this project, and I think I've always understood it. This is just my personal outlook. I've always understood it as using quantitative factors or indicators to kind of develop a relative risk assessment of
Yes.
habitat suitability, that sort of
Yes.
thing. And I think, the fact that it's been done, we're not changing that, we're not undoing it. I think the question here is, how do we word it in a way that people are comfortable explaining it? And I would, I like your idea of kind of vetting this with the Clemson researcher.
Yeah, I just think
But-
we should give them the opportunity. I mean, if it's a moot point and we're not really leaning heavily on that information, fine, but if we really have concerns, I don't know why we wouldn't give them the first opportunity to comment on their work. Or seek clarification from them. And if they don't respond, they don't respond, but that, I'm not sure why we would be deciding that internally.
Casey, this was your original comment. Would you be okay with that if we reached out to them and maybe proposed some ways to approach it?
Well, before I answer, Scott, were you gonna say? Yeah, but I don't know what my comment's gonna be. I was gonna say that this is a quantitative analysis. And maybe you mean more. How confident are we in the quantitative analysis? I think that's about as quantitative as she can get what they did.
Yeah, that was my thought. Yeah, it's quantitative, but maybe it isn't representative of the full picture. Because it just.
Perhaps I'll let Clemson weigh in on that. I'll judge that, but there could be uncertainties involved that kind of would make me see what we're at. That's perfectly reasonable arguments, I think, but it is a quantitative analysis. And honestly, that effort was doing something that I don't think's been done before in the state. You were trying to assess.
It's not been done before.
You're trying to assess if I change some hydrologic statistic, like the average flow, if I change it over the next 50-year planning horizon about 20%, my diversity metric is going to change negatively by 20%. That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, they could find the relationships based on the data they had. They did differ across the state. That is true. I don't know what that means, but that's true. Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Scott. I think the context of how the information was used by the RBC was more on a sort of a context of relative risk. Is this something that is creating an enormous risk that we need to manage, or perhaps not? So I've always looked at it as a quantitative assessment that's used functionally in a more subjective way when it comes to prioritizing management recommendations.
So Kurt, perhaps the purple text, you might want to run that by the Clemson folks.
Mm-hmm.
Saluda RBC is concerned about this wording, that it does not accurately reflect your work or something like that, and ask them if they think what you have here is an accurate assessment of their work. So I understand what Casey is saying, is that it's not something that has been, it's not been in measure for 50 years, so that it's got a good baseline that says, yes, these flow ecology relationships are valid science.
Yeah.
It's more a theoretical application.
Right.
I think that needs to be emphasized, that it's a theoretical application.
Well, and I'm an engineer, so that makes it, if I say it's quantitative, if I go measure X, I've got a confidence in Y.
Yeah, biology and engineering don't tend to agree very well.
Exactly, which is why engineers rule the world. But
I'd like to differ.
I'm just teasing.
I think maybe the question from the engineer.
I was a biological engineer, just let you know.
I know, I'm just teasing too.
What I'd like to suggest is, I think if we ask Clemson just to review this text, they'll say, we wrote it, and so we agree with it. I think they did write this section. I would like to suggest that the RBC wants to make sure we can interpret it correctly. And if there's a way to more completely describe what is quantitative about it and what may not be quantitative about it, either in its execution or in its interpretation and use, that would be very helpful to us. Is that a fair request?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just writing that down before I forget it.
think I got about 30 more of these types of comments.
You do. That's why I only chose one of them, Casey. Okay. All right. Quick time check. We were going to do this until 1 o'clock. It's almost 1 o'clock. There were, I think, 2 or 3 more of these comments for us to go through. I'm going to suggest, first of all, if people need a break, we could take the 5-minute break if we need to. But I do want to make sure we get some time to review the executive summary and the public meeting in this time we have together. And if there's time at the end, we come back to some of these other comments. Is that okay with people?
We're going to 145 was on the agenda. Is that what you meant?
Sorry, say that again, Tom.
Let's go to 145 on the agenda.
Oh yeah, okay. That's kind of why I want to get to these other topics. We may have some time left if these other topics are easy, but I do want to make sure we have some time for them. So is it okay with people if we jump over to the executive summary now, talk about that for a few minutes? If there's time at the end before 1:45, we'll come back to some of the comments.
Yes, sir.
Okay, off we go. People need a 5-minute break.
Plow through.
Follow through. Here we go. All right. We do have a draft executive summaries. John sent it out, I think, on the 14th. Some of you have probably read it, others probably not. It was recent. What I wanted to do today was just walk you through it, orient you a little bit to it, and then have a discussion with you about the pros and cons of developing a 2-page summary of the entire project. It's something that we often do. 2 other RBCs have decided to do that, knowing that different documents, the report, the executive summary as a standalone, will be read by different audiences, are intended for different purposes, and that even that, the executive summary is probably 30 pages, may not distill things down enough to really reach all audiences. So we want to talk about that a little bit. But let's first walk through the executive summary. We just confirm that people have received it. You know, we're not going to check if you've read it and done all the homework. We've been asking a million things of you, but want to make sure everybody has this. Does anybody not have the executive summary? Okay. We were planning to bring printouts of this today, but obviously we don't have that. Okay. Can you see this on my screen now, the executive summary?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is something that we have done for the other basins. The executive summary is what we call a platinum document. It's highly graphical. We have professionals who are trained in graphical conveyance of information, and it's intended for a fairly broad audience, technical audience, non-technical audience, the legislature, Water SC, the groups we've talked about reaching out to today. So you'll see a lot of visual stuff in here, and you can give us some feedback on that. But let me walk you through just to orient you a little bit, because there's one really important piece of this. The sections here, basically through section 5, follow the report sequence. So chapter 1 is summarized in executive summary 1, chapter 2 in executive summary 2, up through 5. And then in chapter 6, we blend all of the different recommendations, the water management recommendations, drought management, and all the planning process, technical, and policy legislative recommendations are all in that section of the executive summary, even though they have their own report chapters. And then there is a summary section on implementation. So forward, I'm not going to read any of this to you, just sort of orient you as to where things are and get your feedback on as to the accessibility of it. Acknowledgements, here you all are. And this is what I really wanted to dig into a little bit here. Yeah, go ahead.
Changes. You're still on the table of contents.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, it's changing on my screen, but not on yours. That's strange. I don't know how to change that. Let's see.
You stress stop sharing, we share it again, and see if that works.
Yeah, okay.
Turn it off and turn it back on. Exactly. Unplug it. Unplug it.
Okay, we'll give this a try. Is that scrolling now?
Yes, yes, sir.
All right, okay. That always works, doesn't it? Okay, this is what I wanted to talk about. We have a section here, it's about 4 or 5 pages, and it's called What to Know About This Plan. And effectively, this is an executive summary of the executive summary. We have sections on the key findings, and you'll find this in different pieces. You know, current water use assessment, the demand assessment, the issue of over allocation, the ecological flow metrics that we just talked about, safe yield, what happens if droughts worsen. These are some of the key things that we talked about over the course of your meetings. And then we summarize the recommendations so that people don't have to read all the way through the executive summary in order to get to this. And it's sort of an orientation section as well as a summary of the summary. And the reason I think I wanted to bring this up is this is the kind of thing that we could include in a separate 2-page summary document, in which, frankly, I recommend we do, because this is still, you know, embodied in a larger document and may not be as accessible to people. But that's something that I want to get your feedback on after we've kind of gone through the rest of this document. So this is a summary of the summary. And then we just, through sections 1 through 5, basically pull out the high points of all of the chapters 1 through 5 and present those in high level summary fashion. You know, what is this plan supposed to do? How did we generate the plan? Who are you? What did you do in this 2-year period? The river basin itself. Assessment of supply and demand. Again, kind of introduction to the model and the technical analysis that we did without getting into any of the details of it. Summary of the groundwater in the basin. All of the demand. These are just extracted from other places in the report. So there's nothing new here. It's just, again, the high-level summaries, which is what an executive summary should be. All the different scenarios. And then the actual management strategies that are evaluated. Again, very brief, just these are the things that we looked at. And then the recommendations. The recommendations are, again, all lumped together in one section in the executive summary so that people don't need to distinguish if they're not familiar between, well, what's a technical recommendation? What's a policy recommendation? What's a drought management versus a water management? They don't need to worry about that. These are all of the recommendations in one place. And we basically bring the lists and tables from later in the report up front. Not a lot of background information where these come from. Not a lot of discussion on priorities here. We get a little bit into that in the next section, but just a nice, concise summary of the recommendations that you've made in the form of lists dealing with different categories. Okay. And then section 7 is the implementation plan. Here we get into the objectives, the performance measures that we talked about today, all of the actions that you're recommending to be taken in the next 5 years, and which the performance measures that we talked about today will assess. Are they successful or not? Section on funding and implementation considerations. And then just a summary. And that's basically it. As I said, it's about 36 pages. So it's a long summary. It has the benefit of that 2 pages or 4 pages at the beginning that consolidates everything in the summary into an even briefer summary. And just, knowing that you haven't probably all read this cover to cover yet, wanted to make sure that you're okay with the structure. As you read through it, if there are some of the photos that don't make sense or in the wrong place, or If we accidentally got a basin incorrect, you can please call us out on that. But generally, for today's purposes, wanted to get your assessment of this structure, and then that will lead into a discussion on the value or not lack of value of a two-page supplement to this that would be a standalone document. Any reactions to this? I know I just kind of flipped through it quickly. But any reactions from those of you who are seeing it for the first time, or those who may have actually sat down and read a little bit?
I apologize, I'm the one that opens my mouth a lot, but frankly, a 30-page executive summary to me is a bit much. Especially if we're trying to get this to decision makers and policymakers, I think most of them would prefer the 2-page executive summary.
Mm-hmm.
So I would do it opposite from what you suggested before, Kirk, where you said a separate document of 2 pages with the literally executive summary of 2 pages, and then you have this 30-page executive summary with the report. I would do it the other way around. I would have a 2-page executive summary in this document. And then if someone wants a not full detailed report, but a synopsis of the report, they can go to the longer document. That said, I'm gonna make 2 other comments and then be quiet. One is the graphics, I think, should have some sort of captions with them so people know what they're looking at. So for instance, when I look at the wastewater treatment system, I know it's a wastewater treatment system, but someone at my drinking water, oh my God. The other thing is, there's one that is absolutely key to this report, and that is the most iconic feature of this basin, Table Rock Mountain. There needs to be a picture of Table Rock Mountain in this report.
I'm just writing this all down. Okay, those are actually very good comments. I agree with you on the captions completely. I think that's a great idea. We'll talk about the 2-page where that fits, and let's put Table Rock Mountain on there unless anybody has a real strong reason not to. But let's dig into that first comment. You're suggesting that this document, this by the way, this will be a standalone document as well as a part of the main report. But I think what you're suggesting is that the standalone document or the 2-page, if we do that, actually be the executive summary of the report, and this document be separate. Did I understand that correctly?
That is my suggestion. That's one person's suggestion, but I'm not a group. I'm just a person.
Yeah, no, that's something I hadn't thought about, something I hadn't considered. I'd love to hear what some other people think about that. And we'll show you an example of what the 2-page summary can look like. And I'll share some of my experience with how we've used those in the past and what the possible benefit could be. But just based on what you know right now, how do other people react to that?
So I'm with Robert. I think the audiences may be different on who's getting these 2 documents. You know, the 2-page, I think anytime, you know, somebody is representing the RBC and is out talking to a group, the 2-pager will be a handout they give out regardless of who they're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
It's a more in-depth presentation. I can see where the longer document would be given out, maybe to decision makers, things along those lines, and they can always be referred to the full document because it will be readily available online. I think we decided earlier. So I don't know if I think the 2-pager needs to be on a pretty fundamental reading level. I mean, where you could take it, I would say from certainly high schooler to public to decision makers, but that the second document, the longer document, is allowed to be a little loftier. That's just my opinion.
Yep. One thing I'll offer for context is that where we've done this in other basins and in fact in other states, all three documents have been standalone so that you can use them individually. So you can, based on where you're going, who you're talking to, you can have the 2-page summary as a standalone document. You can have this 30-page executive summary as a standalone document, and you can have the full report with either or both of the executive summaries included in that document too. So a lot of flexibility in how we do this. Let me show you quickly what the 2-page summary looks like for the Broad River. The context here, and Grace, please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was the Broad and the Upper Savannah who chose to do this, and the Edisto and the PD who chose not to. And there were valid reasons for both decisions. I think starting with the Edisto and the PD, they chose not to do this because they felt that the depth of discussion that they had and the importance of some of the topics would get lost in such a short summary. And they didn't feel that they would be able to come to consensus on what warranted inclusion in a document like this and what didn't. The Broad and the Upper Savannah, I think, came to the opposite conclusion. And others, Scott, Grace, Tom, those in the room, please weigh in. They felt that, what I'm hearing a little bit from this group is that with the number of different types of audiences, ability to assimilate information, ability to understand it, and having the option to summarize things in a very short, succinct way was worth the risk of maybe missing a few points. That it kind of forced them to think about the 2 years of work that they've done together and say, what are the things that we feel are the most important that really matter that people need to know? And I do think, I come to groups like this and I recommend doing this. I think it's a good exercise for all of us involved, ourselves included, to really ask the question very thoughtfully, what are the principal things that we need to convey from this voluminous amount of work, and to do it very quickly. I think it's a very healthy exercise. I often do it on my own, even if it's not a published document. I will often write a 1 or 2 page summary of a project that I'm working on, just so I know what the most important things are that I would want to convey to other people. So the way we did it in the Broad, and then we can open it up for some discussion. Again, summaries of similar things that you just saw in the executive summary, the planning process, the interest categories, current and future water use, the demand projections, key findings. Again, just a lot of things mixed together here. We're not breaking it apart into groundwater and surface water. What did we find? What did we learn? What are the most important things that policymaker or utility or a citizen needs to know? And then the recommendations, and we do categorize those here. We don't always have to. But I think the most important thing is this last piece, which is the call to action. These recommendations are great, but what are the things that you're calling upon people to do now? And that would probably help support a lot of these different recommendations. Now, this is not a template. It's not in the planning framework. This is something that we worked out with the Broad Basin, and I think used something similar in other states and other river basins. But this is something that we could work out with you. We have some flexibility here. We felt that this was a useful outline to get us thinking about what we really want to convey and what we're asking other people to do who may read this plan and have some say over what happens. So I'd love to hear some reactions to the pros and cons of having a document like this. Again, it would probably be a standalone document, but it certainly could be incorporated into the report as well. But knowing that, 2 of the other basins who are as far as you have chosen to do this and 2 have not, I'd love to hear some feedback from this group.
This is Melanie. I like having both. And maybe we call them different things. I think having that 2-pager is important, and we do need to come to consensus on what goes on that. And maybe we call that the I don't know, abbreviated executive summary, or give it some name and then reference the detailed executive summary.
Yeah.
I like having both.
You brought up an important point, Melanie, here, that the detailed executive summary is a requirement. We will produce that. That's
Okay.
part of the planning framework. The question, the option that you have as a council is, do you want this simpler version to supplement that?
Oh, gotcha. I would vote yes.
Yeah, so it's not just an either or, but there is some flexibility here on this. And, you know, frankly, there's a little flexibility on the content in the executive summary. There are some requirements from the planning framework that we need to abide by, but if you know, if the messaging isn't there, we can edit that. That's just like the chapter in the report. But this 2-page summary is entirely optional, and it's up to this RBC how you'd like to proceed with it.
Kirk, I think we want to see the 2-pager. So a lot of folks nodding heads, and I think a couple folks online have blessed it as well.
Okay.
Kirk, did I hear you say that the 30-page executive summary is fixed in stone, that is going to be the format for the executive summary?
I won't say it's fixed in stone, but an executive summary is required in the planning framework, I think. Scott, you can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but it is in some form a requirement. And I think the level of detail in there is consistent with all of the other basins. I think that's an important factor. But it's not an uneditable document. The content is in many ways up to you. I think the outline I'd recommend keeping the same so that it jives with other basins, and people who are reading all of these plans have some consistency. But if there are things that are overemphasized or underemphasized in that, that's something that we can work with you on.
I mean, can we have both in the report? I guess that's where I was coming from, is so that somebody picking up the report that just wants the snapshot can read that 2-pager. They don't have to go looking for a separate document. But we just call it something different than the detailed executive summary. I mean, is that appropriate to have them both in our plan?
I don't see any problem with that. Scott, let me ask you if there are any administrative limitations there that we might run afoul of, but I don't see any hindrances just from my point of view.
What's the proposal say?
Just like, is it like linked as 3 separate links? Are they all combined as one big PDF? I think that's where
We usually separate them out. Yeah.
Is there an administrative constraint, Scott, that would prevent us from including this in the plan?
Like all of the documents.
Kurt, if I may, David Goggins, I lived on Cliff Notes all through high school. Summary would be an ideal situation, and then in the front of every book, you had an introduction, so you could use the 2-page situation there. Just remember, a lot of us were sort of weak on education. We didn't do a whole lot of studying. We went short route.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up, but frankly, this is designed to convey the importance of the work that you've done to any audience, right? It can be a neighbor down the street. It can be a group of 10th graders that you're talking to. It's really designed to be accessible, like a magazine article.
I'm so confused. What about the executive summary, like what's the main body, maybe begin? So it's all of that question. Okay, that's fine, but I still would want to do executive summary separately. Yeah, okay, right. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I don't think we're suggesting taking them out of the main document or putting them in. It's not an either or. I think the question is, we can certainly have these as separate documents so that they're useful on their own. I think the question was, is it okay if we write a 2-page summary to include that in the file of the report itself?
So again, It sounds like we are moving in the direction that I had not suggested. My suggestion is the two-page summary be called an executive summary, because that to me is what an executive summary is. But it sounds like we're moving to a two-page summary sheet, synopsis, or whatever you call it, and then that 30-page executive summary in the report. And again, I just want to make it clear that, in my opinion, that is not the way to do a report. But if that the RBC is planning on moving, okay, got it.
That's the way to frame it. I would suggest calling the 2-pager the executive summary and the 30-pager the plan overview.
So would I.
So I think we can accommodate this. As I said, I think all three of these documents would be standalone, and how you want to incorporate them into the report itself, I think we can talk about that. There may be some planning framework requirements that limit our flexibility. John and I can talk about that. But for now, let me propose this, that we will prepare a 2-page summary, and you can look at it. You can decide if it really does elevate the points that you want to elevate, and not anything else extraneous, and then decide how you want to move forward with these. But right now, it's just sort of a conceptual thing. I'd like to put it in front of you with text, with words, with figures, so that you can determine how it's best used. Is that a fair proposition?
Develop the three, we'll decide what we call them later.
There you go. That's a much better way of saying what I just said. Yeah.
The other thing I'll say is that I don't think the planning framework prohibits you from doing it different ways, but question I have, and DES may have, is that if you do like all in one document, that's just not how we've done it at the Basin today. And I don't know if that's a problem or not, but just something I might have to think about. It may not be.
Yeah.
Consistency. Yeah.
Yeah, I that was sort of my question too, Scott. And we, maybe you and John and Casey, Catherine, and I can sit down and talk about the bylaws and requirements, make sure we're meeting all those in our next planning meeting, and then have something that at least we'll have these 3 documents so we can share them and figure out where they best fit, and not have anybody throw any flags on the play.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we'll do that, and it's actually, I actually really enjoy writing these 2-page summaries, because it really makes you think about what is important to talk about. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint screen again?
No.
Now you're gonna hold down the yes.
Stop sharing again.
Eric, I do have 2 just really quick comments about aesthetically, which this report looks beautiful. I will say it would be awesome if it got run through like an ADA compliance for colors, because there are some light colors against light backgrounds that I think will be hard to read, and so we just need to make sure this is accessible to everyone.
Yep.
And second, I think we've got a few duplicate photos. Mostly, I think it's like Unity Park or the Falls, which proud Greenvillian over here, but I think we could be a little more equitable across the basin. And I do feel like we only have 1 farm photo, so it'd be really nice to have another really beautiful, like maybe sunset over a farm. If, looking at you too, it'd be great to provide like. I would love to have you in the picture.
It's not the best though.
There you go.
Could use more people.
I thought that's what you had on next.
Yeah. No, I thank you, Catherine, for bringing that up. I agree. And if anybody, please, if you have photos that you'd like to include in this, I don't know what the resolution requirements are, but I think we can find a way to get the photos in. That's more important. So we'll certainly do that. Catherine will look at color compliance. We'll look at all the photos for duplication, and any additional photos, Table Rock Mountain, farmland, anything. We will find a way to get that in here.
We'll get you some pics.
Excellent.
Thanks, Bert.
Excellent. Thank you. And more is better. Don't, just send more and we'll find ways. We can, sprinkle them through some of the report chapters too. So don't hold back. All right. Is the PowerPoint now back on?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the public meeting. This is really our last topic other than upcoming schedule. I think we have the public meeting scheduled tentatively for April. Tom, do you know if we actually have a date?
Well, it sounds like you won't, do you think we'll get to voting on the draft plan in March with all of these corrections, or do you think that'll be in April?
I'm guessing it'll probably be in April.
So we probably ought to push some of these back.
Yeah, okay. We'll talk about that in a minute. But really what I wanted to do today as something actionable is get people to volunteer to speak at the public meeting. This is just an example of the outline we put together for the broad public meeting. The chair, Ken Tuck, spoke. A number of members of the RBC spoke about different topics, different chapters. And again, this is to a public audience. It's approachable language. It's graphics and maps that help people understand what we've done and the value and how the recommendations will benefit them. It's really, this is the beginning of the outreach. So really, we don't need to decide on it today, but if there are people who would volunteer to speak on any of these topics, I'm happy to take some names down. And if I don't get any, you can be sure that John will be reaching out to you specifically.
Well, I certainly think Catherine and I are required to talk, so.
I would agree with that.
Other voices.
I agree with that too. One of the things that I think has been very, quite honestly, poignant and useful are some of the, I'll get this word wrong, the water interest categories, members from the water interest categories, talking at the Water SC meetings to share what their values are, how their values have been brought into the planning process. That kind of thing woven into these topics. Maybe we even include some additional topics, viewpoints, perspectives. I think that has really captured people's attention. I would encourage you to think about that.
And I'll piggyback on what he said. So at the public meeting that Water SC had, there was a group from agriculture there. And there were some water utilities and RBC members and all. But I think the most impactful comments were probably from the ag folks. And that just was my vantage point from where I was sitting, and hearing comments from others after that what ag was saying, they heard. So I agree with her. It's and as we plan for this public meeting, I would encourage y'all to encourage your constituents to please come to this meeting, hear what was done. If they have something to say, step up and say it, because it will certainly impact how we do the plan. But others are listening to these conversations. And the viewpoint of the general public, especially if their viewpoint is they support this, carries much more weight than you can really anticipate. So I just share that as we talk about this meeting. Now I expect the rest of y'all to volunteer for one of these slots.
Well said. Well said. I'll add to that, Casey, that we can talk until we're all blue in the face about the technical analysis we did and the math and the way the numbers work or don't work. The public likes stories, frankly, and they like personal stories. And I think that's what captured the imagination of so many people from the members of the agricultural community who spoke at the Water SC meeting. They were telling their personal stories with water, and it often went back generations. And you could hear the room kind of slow down and pay attention to what these people were saying. I think if we had that from multiple user sectors, I think that would be so much more valuable to the public than for us to simply regurgitate our results and show a bunch of graphs and maps. I think if we can put a personal touch on it, you'd be doing yourselves a favor, you'd be doing your constituents a favor. So I'll ask now, and we'll ask again later, of course, but are there any volunteers who would like to share perspectives, personal or professional, from their water use sector at the public meeting?
Oh, you know, that, oh, everybody willing to slay that, yeah.
Thompson, was that you?
Hey.
Got your name down. Thanks.
Kevin Miller's going to speak to recreation.
Kevin Miller for recreation.
Sorry, who was that, Tom?
Kevin Miller.
Kevin. Okay, thanks, Kevin.
So you're gonna cover utility stuff like from. Are you gonna introduce things? You need another utility person.
I would welcome another utility person to talk, but if not, I'll do it.
I may not be, I'm not the primary person on this board.
So I hear Jeff from Green Bull is willing to talk.
No. See, I gotta do this.
I'm curious, Jeff.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm not volunteering either, Jeff.
Hey,
I heard Jeff's in and I heard Jeff's out. Jeff, I'll look to you.
Hey, may do it.
Phil Fragate is going to do it from Duke.
Okay.
But yeah, either Tate or Patrick.
I was about to say Patrick may be willing to do it as well.
Guys,
Yeah, let's volunteer him.
what about Guy? Not here either.
I'm sorry.
Guy's not here either. From. Thanks to Captain. Is he on the board? No,
What's the name?
Guy from Sparta?
no,
Yeah, Guy Schultze and yeah, Jay Nichols.
Oh, yeah.
Jay Nicholson.
Yeah, Jay Nichols.
Jay Nicholson will always want to talk.
You can also physically have it because
That's a long trip.
Because of our basin, we have talked about there may be a need for 2 meetings, kind of up basin and down basin. So keep that in mind, not saying you're volunteering for both of them, but you're volunteering. No, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but realize that that may be a reality. I hope it is, quite frankly.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I think the people who speak at the first one get to designate the people who speak at the second one. I think that's how it works.
What kind of attendance have you gotten in these other road calls?
Fairly low.
Terrible.
Less than terrible.
So, and quite frankly, it's, to me, on us to try to get, it'd be great if general public showed up. Most folks that show up have a connection to somebody associated with the program. Now, I'm not a social media person or anything like that. I think there's absolutely a place for that. For the folks that are on organizations that have that. Quite frankly, Lawrence County Water and Sewer Commission does pretty good with social media. So I'm sure we will advertise it. But
We'll put it.
I think Jeff Boss actually agreed to donate 2 standing paddle boards that we could auction off at each meeting. So that way we can.
We don't have that.
Just volunteering you to donate those.
Oh, he would have told me that, trust me. Can't get-
I mean, we could be more creative than past Basin, that's all I'm saying. Like, we could have cool snacks and a sweet giveaway. I don't know, it's like, doesn't have to be boring.
so, and we haven't
Seeing
talked
some
about
numbers.
this for But we would solicit, options for where to hold this meeting. I don't think this facility is the best option for holding this meeting. We could, but I think there's probably something closer to either end, that's, more indicative to having a public meeting.
Well, that we can do if it's up in the upstate.
Yeah,
At the community room.
the community room at Greenville may be an ideal place.
Got the river center.
The River Center would be one, where they're doing the water SC public meeting, out at the farmers markets.
Yeah, that's not the Saluda.
We can annex it.
Saluda's Cove is a good place to have a public.
Nobody can say it loud.
Think about it, if you have an idea that may be available or makes sense, just let us know.
You can split it.
And honestly, the best way to get people to come to these meetings is to talk to them face to face. So whenever you're meeting with constituents, with neighbors, that's the best way to get them to participate. So I'd encourage you all to do that.
Yeah, food and cash. Either one of those three.
And alcohol. This association office in the school. That's free beer. It will
Not open yet, is it?
No, well, it should be mixed.
I don't think it's gonna be big. Sorry, we've got a little side note on it.
That's quite all right. I understand. It's getting late. We do have just one more topic to cover, and that's our upcoming schedule. I think we'll talk in a minute about the voting process to approve the plan. My sense is that we will probably require some further discussion in March to review some of the changes that we talked about today, and to let you have time to go through the comment log and make sure you're comfortable with that. Again, I don't expect, honestly, everybody to look through every single comment. Your way of supporting the plan is to vote on it, and it's up to you how detailed you want to go through the comment log. So that's up to you. As Tom said, the first public meeting will probably be after you have the vote on the draft plan, so that we can issue it for public review. So that maybe gets shifted to May. We'll be addressing the plan, the comments from that, and finalizing the plan, and then potentially a second public meeting sometime in the summer. So let me talk a little bit about what is entailed in the voting for the plan. It'll be 2 steps. And forgive me, I don't know exactly how much John may have covered this with you before, but I'll offer this as a refresher if he has. The first step is voting on the draft plan. It's a test of consensus to see where we have maybe some room to make an improvement for the benefit of all. You basically, after we've addressed your comments, you've had a chance to review that, we'll ask you to vote 1 through 5 on the plan. And this is in accordance with the planning framework. 1 indicates full endorsement, you're behind it. 2 indicates you're endorsing it, but with some minor points of contention. You can live with these still. It's still, if it were up to you, you change a few things. 3 is you're still offering your endorsement, but with some major points of contention. Again, the endorsement implies that you can live with these, but you'd like it to be, put forward or on the record that there are some things that you or your constituents are uncomfortable with. 4s and 5s, we really want to stay away from. In fact, even 3s, we want to stay away from. And that's why we're asking that as you review the draft, if there are issues that would really make you consider standing aside with major reservations, you're not going to endorse the plan as it is. That's something we'd like to hear before we get to the voting. And you can do that here in this forum today. You can do that next month, assuming we don't hold the vote then. You can do that by reaching out to John or to me and talking about it, or to Casey and Catherine. We'll all consider that. And then 5 is, really you're ready to leave. You're not going to endorse this report if you don't see that future participation is beneficial. Most of the basins have gotten to the point where it's ones and twos across the board. That's not universal, but that's what we want to strive for. And so if you feel that you're in the 3, 4, or 5 category, we'd like to hear about it. Doesn't need to be right now. But as you're reviewing the report, this is what we'd like you to be thinking about. Where would you consider yourself when it comes time to approve the draft? Now, there will be time between the draft and final where we can address some of those comments. So if you do have reservations, we can talk about them in the group here. And if needed, we can make some changes if they're agreeable to the group and don't change other people's perception of their level of endorsement, unless it brings it up, of course. So that's your first vote. The second step is on the final plan. Once we've incorporated all your comments, we've gone through this 1 through 5 voting. We've tried to rectify any points of contention that you might have or assuage those somehow. And the last step, once we've issued a document, is for you to give it the thumbs up or the thumbs down. You either concur with the plan, can live with it, and are committed to supporting, advocating for it, and implementing it, or you're not. And hopefully by the time we get to that point, you're all on board with concurrence because we've addressed your concerns. So that said, I know we're just about at the time to stop for today. Have you seen this before, this scale? I think we've brought it up a few times during the course of the planning meeting that we've had. I think, Catherine, was that a yes?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we've brought it up. Is it clear to everybody? Are there any questions about it?
Very good. Well, Kirk, what time of the day are you planning to do these public meetings?
Good question. I haven't thought that far ahead. John and Scott and Casey maybe have thought that far ahead. So I don't have an answer, but if Scott or Casey or Catherine has some input on that.
6 to 8, yeah, usually 6 to 8 has been what they are in the evening.
I think the broad was 6 to 8. Yeah, this broad here was 6 to 8. And I think that's been consistent. Let me just ask this point blank. Is there anybody right now who feels like they can't get behind this plan? Even if you have some concerns or some reservations with some of its topics. Does anybody feel that there's something irreconcilable in the plan, the way it's emerged right now, that you couldn't get behind it? Okay. That silence is reassuring. I know that there will be some concerns and some points of contention. We will address those through the comment process and through our next meeting or two. But I appreciate that that acknowledgement for now. I think it is 1:45. Our agenda had us going through 1:45. So unless there's anything else, Casey, I'll turn it back to you for adjournment.
We have several housekeeping items really quick. So chapters 1 and 9 were due today for comments back. We agreed that chapter 10 you would resubmit, correct?
Yep.
Of today, so don't review chapter 10 until we receive it again. Chapter 7 is due on the 28th. The executive summary is due on the 28th. So just time wise, I guess what will be your turnaround for chapter 10 and then potential due date, because then we'll have reviewed every chapter by that point.
Right.
And just to admit publicly, you won't get my edits on chapter 9 till tomorrow. I have a meeting after this to discuss a couple of points on chapter 9 internally.
Fair enough.
Anything else?
I'll confirm all those dates with John too. I think that all sounds right, Catherine. Thank you.
Great. And then I guess if you could, when you send that, also confirm when you think you'll be sending a full. Because I know you've sent some revised chapters, but to be honest, I'm not looking at those until the whole thing's resubmitted.
You want the plan, right?
Yeah,
Understood.
that would be helpful. Thank you.
All right, anything else for the good of the order that we need to discuss? All right, I will ask. There's still food over here. There are some containers. Please take some food home with you. Otherwise, I will be freeze drying even more mashed potatoes and gravy. Freeze dries beautifully, but I got a gracious plenty. If Armageddon comes, I can keep my family and probably several others in mashed potatoes, gravy, and green beans for a long time. They don't want any more, so please help yourself and take that. Otherwise, appreciate everybody being here. Appreciate everybody being online. The work has been fantastic. We've got a little bit more. Let's finish strong. I appreciate everybody's input into this process. And again, I think we're going to have certainly one of the best 8 RBC plans in the whole world. So I'm excited about that. But I would entertain a motion to be adjourned. Second, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Travel safely. Y'all take care. Please get through.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience with me in a virtual environment today. I appreciate it.
Did great. Thank you, sir.
Feel better.
I will. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.